The world already ended once. The hero tower collapsed, humanity was destroyed, and the only survivor left was a blacksmith named Lee Se-hoon. To stop the apocalypse, he sacrificed his own life using a forbidden skill connected to the Sea of Destruction. But instead of dying, he wakes up in the past with all his memories intact. Now the man who once forged legendary weapons has one chance to remake fate itself. Can a single blacksmith stop the end of the world before it happens again? Pandemonium, surpassing humanity. These are the faces of the demonic forces threatening the earth. 6 demons have been summoned, and destruction is inevitable. These intense waves of destruction, destroying everything on Earth, were preparing to wipe out humanity's last blacksmith. The protagonist exhaled tensely as drops of blood trickled down his face and muttered, "Damn it." He suddenly clutched his heart, and the system reported, extracting the fate and purpose of Se-hong. The level of the means created by Se-hong, the extraction of fate. He picked up a magic stone surrounded by a magical aura and began to create it with a special hammer. He felt the sound of the waves and heard it when he first awakened his magic. Its image is the sound he often heard before while crafting weapons. A sea of destruction. If only he had realized it earlier. If he had worked the hammer faster, would the end have been different? This is so damn stupid. He forged a new, sharp sword and suddenly vanished into space. When he closed his eyes, he was silent for a moment, when suddenly he opened them again and saw a special weapon before him, and the system reported that the weapon's image had been realized. But the image of a return to the roots is in the making. Humanity finally triumphed, and the 6 great demons seeking to destroy the world, including the last demon god, the Sea of Doom, were defeated. However, most of the earth had already been swallowed by the Sea of Doom created by this monster, and humanity soon perished. When the protagonist exhaled, he asked, "They won, but why do they feel like they've lost?" Not to mention the surviving heroes. Even the hero tower supporting the earth had collapsed. He looked ahead and realized that the cursed Sea of Doom hadn't disappeared even after the demon god was killed. The protagonist asked his friend if he was really going to whine about this now. He said that if anyone saw it, they'd think it was his doing. Louise approached him and said that the child who was lying there pretending to be injured was now trying to act tough. Amir clutched his head and asked, "He told you, right?" Their friend was trying to get out of the situation at someone else's expense by taking command. Se-hong said they should stop talking nonsense. They would have died long ago if not for the equipment he made for them. The boys asked again, "What?" That was simply absurd. He told them to shut up, because if they didn't like it, they could return it. They were dumbfounded and couldn't answer him. The trinity before him were the so-called 3 dogs. They weren't on the side of humanity, but they didn't join the pandemonium freaks either. They acted as they pleased, interested only in their own gain and adapted to the situation. The dogs might be selfish, but they survived, holding out until the very end and ultimately achieving great feats. If they had used their power even a little earlier, would everything have turned out differently? Se-hong pondered this for a long time, and after a while asked if anyone was alive. Sonha clutched his stomach and said that he was finished, his insides crushed. Louise said she was in the same situation. Maybe it was the curse, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Amir also said his heart was pierced, so he couldn't use his vest either. Se-hong said they should have helped from the start. Instead, they ignored everything and cared only for themselves. Suddenly, he turned around and was stunned when he saw that all the guys were dead and unconscious. He said they were troublemakers until the very end, and grabbing his weapon, he swung it and placed it near Amir, saying that they should handle the equipment carefully because they couldn't use it like that. This would at least serve as a tombstone. At that moment, he wondered if it was really his turn now. He would do this for the last time. He raised his hand, placed it on his chest, and the system reported that he had extracted fate from the target. Based on his affinity with Se-hong, he chose to extract fate. The system reported that he had a unique skill, Fate Forger, which allows him to extract a special ore from an object with which he had established a connection. The effect of the work varies depending on the affinity and potential of the target. However, he used it on himself and obtained something even worse than ordinary iron ore. It would have been better if he had done this earlier. If it was empty, then let him spare him this painful regret. At that moment, he began to forge with his hammer, wondering if what he was hearing now was the sound of the Sea of Destruction or the roar of the waves he had always heard. One thing was certain. Every time that sound rang in his ears, he created an object beyond imagination. At that moment, a bright beam of light emanated from his limbs, and he wondered if he really didn't even have a special ability. He thought he could create something worthwhile, even if it was just his own destiny stone. This couldn't be more ordinary. Rather than be like this and die in these waves, he would end his life with his own hands. At that moment, he gritted his teeth against the piercing pain and smiled. He realized that he too was a madman, to think that all he had done until the very end was hammer. While crafting the final blade, he realized something. The sound of the waves he'd often heard since first awakening his magical power, the clue he'd been searching for all this time, was simply a sea of destruction. If only he'd realized this earlier, or perhaps they should have convinced the 3 dogs sooner. No, if only he'd started hammering for others just a little bit sooner, much could have changed. The system reported that the weapon's image had been realized and the return to origins image skill was in the process of being created. After some time, he woke up and realized he wasn't dead yet, which surprised him. A young man approached him and asked, "Candidate Sehong, what he was doing?" Sehong didn't understand. They called him a candidate, but that hadn't happened for 31 years. At that moment, the young man suddenly screamed. How could he be floating in the clouds during an entrance exam? He asked in fear. What? What entrance exam? That was 31 years ago. Was he really in Babylon? Was his whole life flashing before his eyes? He tried to understand what was happening and paused, then realized it was the embodiment of the image he had seen just before his death. A return to his roots? Was all this really happening because of the weapon forged from his fate zones? This was his final warning, candidate. If he didn't do it right now, he would throw him out of here. Sehong replied, yes, and realized it was regression. If he realizes his abilities early and swings the hammer sooner, can he change everything? He grabbed the hammer and realized, no, it didn't matter at all. Only one thing mattered. He had to seize this opportunity. And then, he realized that this time, he would definitely save everyone. These thoughts filled him with joy. In this life, he would pass the Babylon exam. Meeting the three dogs was only the beginning. He began to forge the weapon, when suddenly a man passing by froze and turned around abruptly. He realized that this candidate was amazing. The movements appear slow, but the rhythm of perfect forging is confident, and the resonance is pure and clear. These are skills of the highest order. He continued to observe what was happening, and Sehong didn't notice him. He didn't understand this perfection. Had he really forged it? They had an exceptional candidate. Even if he simply submitted his work as is, he would immediately qualify for this competition. Both men were stunned, and Sehong chuckled and said that he was still far from perfect. Displaying such ugliness was something he, as a blacksmith, could not tolerate. The instructor began shouting, did he just destroy a weapon right in front of the professor? Does he think forging is some kind of joke? Sehong turned to the examiner and said he would like to redo the assignment. The instructor shouted at him to listen, when suddenly the professor told Han's assistant to bring him the remaining materials. Han didn't understand what he meant, and the professor said, he didn't break any rules, right? Or does he want him to go get it himself? Han exclaimed, startled. No, he'll bring it right now. He was so angry that he expressed it emotionally, but he still left the room. Sehong was surprised by this reaction, and the professor turned to him and asked, he knows there are only 40 minutes left until the end of the exam, right? Sehong replied, yes, and the professor asked, did he really think breaking the weapon he'd made was the right decision? Sehong silently looked at the floor and said yes, to which the professor replied, fine, let him try. Sehong considered that with such a body, perfect forging would be difficult. He had little mana, strength, and time left. Then this was the best option in his circumstances. But before he could ponder this, someone suddenly asked, what was that sound? Was this madman infusing the stones with mana and igniting them? What was he doing? If he kept doing this, the stones would explode. Sehong ignored everyone and continued his actions, causing the students taking the exam to think he was crazy. It simply couldn't be. A bright, multicolored magical aura began to emerge from the fireplace, and everyone exclaimed that it was a fire and they needed a fire extinguisher quickly. Han ran to the professor and asked him to tell him to stop. The professor told him to leave him alone. Fine, if he was a candidate, but he shouldn't react like that. He should watch the flames closely. Han looked at the professor in surprise, and Sehong continued using the colored flame demon. This high-temperature flame is enhanced by the resonance of 5 types of ignition stones. It requires precise mana control, but it's an excellent technique that can be used even with minimal mana. The students asked, what, didn't it explode? Wait, that's the color of the iron ingot that changed. The professor realized what it was and resonated with the ignition stone to increase the fire's power and alter the ingot's properties. This significantly reduced the time needed for forging, but he still had only 30 minutes left. His previous forging had been excellent, but if this was all he had, he wouldn't have time to complete it. The protagonist continued to strive, and a moment later, with a smile on his face, he confidently forged a new weapon from bright flames of various colors. He exhaled with relief and continued forging the weapon, when suddenly he tensed. He realized the heat was running low, his mana was depleted, and his defenses had worn off. He needed to start training as soon as the exam was over, as his body was too weak, and yet, he couldn't waste a second. He continued to struggle, pushing himself to the limit, when he was informed that only 10 minutes remained. When 3 minutes remained, he had already crafted the weapon, and when the exam stopped with 1 minute remaining, he had also managed everything. He clenched his fist and completed the weaponry of the colored fireblade. The system reported that he had acquired the Flame Master skill, rank C. The item evaluation results showed that the 5-colored fireblade was rank high. The 5-colored fireblade is a curved sword engraved with 5 flames. When compressed, the flame blade reacts to mana, creating multicolored fire. This item allows one to see the potential of the blacksmith who created it. The blade's color and properties can vary slightly depending on the natural mana infused into it. The weapon's rank was also high. The boys exchanged questioning glances, and Sehong said he would appreciate it if they read the detailed description in the information window. The professor was surprised and thought that anyone would call this a success. Han hadn't expected such a result and didn't understand. Had he really passed the exam? He wanted to shout about it, but the professor told him to be quiet, and he apologized. Sometime later, In the professor's office, In-chul turned to the protagonist, who asked if the sword was worthy of acceptance this time. He replied, yes, for now, but he still seemed dissatisfied. Sir, he'll be frank, this place can't meet his standards. He'd be better off withdrawing his application. After all, Babylon's fame is overwhelming. However, the forging department wasn't showing any significant results, and Sehong silently considered that it was a fact. Babylon's forging department would close in 8 years due to declining standards. In the future, Vulcan Academy would become the world's best institution for training blacksmiths. Perhaps his future at Vulcan would be better, but before the professor could finish, Sehong suddenly told him he was mistaken. The best would be Babylon, not Vulcan, and that was the place he was applying to. He confidently stated this, and the professor became wary. He frowned, then sat down in a chair and said that in that case, he would first need to become the best student in the department. Was he confident? Sehong confirmed that of course, at least among the students, he would be unrivaled. In-chul said he knew how Babylon selects the best first-year student in their department. He replied that the top student candidate is selected through an additional exam between the 2 best students in their department, and from these candidates, the most outstanding is selected. That's all he knew. Babylon Academy divides cadets into 3 main departments: combat, support, and technology. Within each department, dozens of specialties intertwine like roots, and competition among departments means achieving a high score among all specialties and being recognized as a top-tier talent in Babylon. After a brief silence, In-chul said he would tell him again, not as a professor, but as a senior blacksmith. Even if he becomes the best in the blacksmith department, it's hard to count on success here. He should join Vulcan Academy. That's his path. Sehong reflected that he was prioritizing his junior over his own position in the future. He was a worthy man. Environment didn't matter, and he had already said that Babylon was the place he was applying to. It would soon become the best. In-chul thought about the place where he would become the best. He extended his hand and said that his statement was beyond arrogance, but why he liked it. He would be happy to work with him. Sehong shook his hand and smiled, saying he did too. The system reported that a connection had been established with the game's target, the level of affinity with the creator being the same. Destiny extraction, and In-chul's target. At that moment, the protagonists extended their hand, and the system reported that it was destiny, fire-bearing iron, high rank, medium to low quality. This metal possesses flames, the properties of wood, and can accumulate fire within. After some time, it got dark outside, and Sehong found himself at home. He looked at the metal and said it was not bad. He couldn't have imagined how big it would be. Destiny extraction digitizes relationships with a specific target, and to extract non-existent ore, the problem is that the connection level is not a language, so using it now is difficult. Moreover, compared to the first-year students at Babylon, his stats look pitiful. In many ways, it's unfortunate, but considering that's the price for returning to the past, he got off easy. That's right, and he won't rush. Wanting more is simply greed. There's still time to crush those pandemonium freaks. Pandemonium is a coalition of monsters threatening not only humanity, but the entire planet. The 6 great demon gods' destruction of humanity was also entirely their plan. He can't be picky about means and methods if he wants to stop them, and he can't allow important future events to become jumbled in his memory. So he first needs to acquire equipment or skills related to enhancement. He thought about how the first step of the plan, entering Babylon, had been completed. But before he could fully process this thought, he suddenly looked ahead and was stunned. A system appeared in front of him, informing him that the skill Fate imprint had been added. A week later, Sehong found himself at Babylon Academy, looking around and confused. He was lost again. Had he really come to the right place? He saw a door with the sign, Refining Room, and realized that this was what he needed. As he entered, he greeted someone. But suddenly someone called his ominous name and said he looked rather relaxed. Couldn't he see they were waiting for him? It was Michael Barmuth, the vice dean of Borsip. In-chul told the vice dean that there were still 10 minutes until the supplementary exam. He replied that it wasn't a matter of time, but of attitude. He would give him a warning. Sehong, confused by what had just happened, silently scratched his head. Not only was the forging department in poor condition, but he was also in conflict with his superiors. Now he understood why he had recommended another academy. At that moment, he looked questioningly at his rival, who glared menacingly at him and his hand. He said he was glad to meet him, but his rival simply turned away and didn't respond. Sehong was disappointed, as no one had treated him like that in a long time. After a while, a girl entered the office and asked if everyone was ready. The boys exchanged glances, and Michael said they'd been wondering when the dean would arrive. He realized she was a familiar face. She sat down in the chair opposite him and apologized for being late. Her name was Yoon Ha, and Sehong clutched his head, looked at her questioningly, wondering what she was doing there. He'd heard she used to work in Babylon, but he didn't expect her to be the dean. She was a C-class hero, weapon-devouring Yoon-ha. She possessed a unique skill that increased her strength by absorbing weaponry. Before his regression, she had long been his regular customer. He recalled the past, when she sat on the ground in the rain, regretting eating his weaponry. He approached her without answering, and she, looking down, remained silent. At that moment, he remembered her and heard his name, when he suddenly looked up and said, "Yes." In-chul stood up and said that he would explain the essence of the exam exam, so they should listen carefully. The exam lasted 90 minutes. During these 90 minutes, the two of them must create a weapon that would pair with the blade from the previous exam. However, only alchemical forging could be used for this creation. As for the materials, they were free to use any ore presented here. The created weapon would be evaluated by Dean Yun-ha and Vice Dean Michael. Therefore, they must strive to create something they can be proud of. At that moment, he raised his hand and shouted, and so the exam began. The boys were determined, and Sehong, tying on an apron, wondered, only alchemical forging, right? He needed to create a resonance using only pure mana to prevent the elemental force from getting out of control. At that moment, his opponent turned to him and asked brazenly, will staring at the materials increase his mana or something? Sehong wondered if he had misheard. Was that addressed to him just now? The guy asked again, is there anyone else here? This guy's name was Hans, and he lowered his gaze and said he'd pay more attention. Sehong repeated his name in his head and realized it was the guy from the studio. They had the same last name, so it was no surprise they looked alike. The more he thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. At that moment, Hans smiled, as if his opponent had realized he was the Vice Dean's son. He simply had the lowest mana level among the applicants, while he himself was born into the Bamut family, renowned for his alchemical forging skills, and possessed mana reserves equal to those of a top second-year student. The outcome of this exam was already a foregone conclusion. With these thoughts in mind, he continued crafting weapons. Unha, who was sitting opposite him and observing, remarked that lapis lazuli and jade both have very high mana content. Michael added that they were also naturally saturated with water attribute mana. Inchul said that water attribute mana is sensitive to fire, making it difficult to forge. Michael replied that this was a problem of the past. Modern alchemical forging is different from what it used to be. Inchul protested, saying that while alchemical forging is unlimited by space or situation, forging time is highly dependent on the master and the ore. But before he could finish his sentence, Michael announced 30 minutes left and smiled at Hans's ability to synthesize any ore in 30 minutes. Inchul was surprised that resonant synthesis in just 30 minutes was feasible. If he could do something like that, he was significantly superior to second-year students, not to mention applicants. He realized that the tight deadline for forging mana stones was due to the abundance of materials and the alchemical forging method. The exam topic was initially advantageous to Hans, given his background. He realized that Michael had orchestrated the whole thing, and Michael said that this should be enough. Suddenly, Unha froze, looking ahead and seeing the hydrate and scarlet firestone that Sehong had picked up. Michael thought that the version of lapis lazuli and jade, fire-based, possessed high mana content, and he didn't know about skills, but he certainly had a huge ego. Hans turned and saw his opponent's ore and didn't understand. Had he deliberately chosen the opposite ore, he was just a fool. With his mana, he would never be able to control the Scarlet Firestone. It would be easier than he thought, but suddenly his face changed, and the system reported that the Seal of Fate skill had been activated. The Harmony Binding Seal was activated. The Seal of Fate allows the use of the affinity formula to influence one's body. The current gold equipment is the left hand and right hand. The right hand is flammable iron. Sehong extended his hand, which glowed with a bright flame, and Hans didn't understand. This guy was using useless and cheap tricks. Sehong continued to smile, creating the impossible, when suddenly the ore merged with the magic stone, and everyone in the hall was dumbfounded. Michael realized he intended to create a resonance using the similar properties of the minerals. This is idiotic. The principle is to resonate elemental minerals using only pure mana. Forcing it will eventually cause the elemental mana to spiral out of control. A stupid idiot would definitely cause something terrible. Suddenly, Sehong continued his struggle, and everyone saw a fiery force, forcing them to close their eyes from the incoming bright light. When the flames flared, Sehong smiled and saw the fire iron before him, which had been removed. The weapon forging was complete, and he was congratulated on creating the necessary flame accumulator. The jury members were dumbfounded by what they saw, not expecting him to succeed. The system reported that the scabbard, saturated with mana and fire attributes, stores and enhances mana, and fire attributes allow the use of the Wild Flame skill. It turned out he had already completed the synthesis, which surprised Hans and caused him to stop doing anything. He looked at his hands and realized it was impossible. Normal elemental mana was spiraling out of control. Had he misunderstood something? Sadness appeared in his eyes, and at that moment, Michael shouted to stop, because if he imbued the mana stones with elemental mana, everything would be bad. Hans had already done this with his own hands, and was frightened. A bright blue light and numerous fragments appeared before him, which a moment later created a huge explosion right in the office. Sometime later, at the forging department's testing ground, numerous stones were scattered everywhere, and Michael was upset with his son. Normally, after the evaluation, one of the two students would be recommended as the best candidate for admission to the undergraduate program. This was very bad. Hans stood in bewilderment, holding his trembling, bloody hand. It was an absolute defeat, and Michael said that since the student was injured during the exam, it would be best to invalidate the exam and announce a retake date later. Inchul turned around and replied that they couldn't annul an exam that had already taken place. After all, wasn't this due to the carelessness of the student Hans? Michael replied, Professor Kim, It seems he cares more about the exam results than the student. He decided to start by saying that the fastest speed currently known in academic circles was 5 minutes. The moment a student entered the academy, he activated and simultaneously achieved resonance. Do they think this makes any sense? He stood confidently and stared ahead silently. Alchemical forging was originally a technique created to craft weaponry using only mana in situations where conventional forging was impossible. Therefore, the essence of alchemical forging lies not in the traditional method of killing ore to imbue the blacksmith with life, but in identifying the mineral's origins and uncovering the ore's life cycle. What is the essence of alchemical forging? This is exactly what he produced, which is also the answer that the academic blacksmithing community would eventually find after countless trials and errors. It's a simple method that will become standard in a few years, so there's no particular need to keep it a secret. But there's no need to teach this stubborn old man who does nothing but bark and doesn't listen. He replied that he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Michael smiled and said that, as expected, he had cheated. A first-year student without a worthy background was creating rare-rank weaponry. If he was planning to cheat, he should have kept it within the realm of possibility. Sehong became angry and started shouting, "What is he talking about?" Yunha stood up and replied that he was right, it was nonsense. Michael confirmed that, as expected, she understood everything. Dean, right? This is absurd. They should disqualify student Sehong for cheating and conduct a new exam. At that moment, Yunha didn't answer him and walked towards Sehong, which surprised Michael. She looked at his weapon, and no one understood what she was doing. She took it in her hands and muttered that it was pointless. Drooling, she pointed her finger at Sehong and said, "Just one bite. No, one lick." Can she lick this item once? Everyone around was stunned, unable to understand what was happening. No one knew how to react, and a long, awkward silence followed. Later that day, Sehong, moving around the city center alone, realized everything had happened as expected. The weapon itself was quite complete, and the fine-tuning was still in progress. However, seeing Vice Dean Michael shaking with rage was quite a sight. He chuckled at this, and people passing by remarked that he was laughing like a pervert. This guy was weird and shouldn't look him in the eye. He should just walk on by. Sehong ignored these people and continued to ponder that, if you think about it, Barmouth, that name seemed familiar, but where did it come from? Suddenly, he remembered Louise telling him that when she was in Babylon, the weapon she bought for next to nothing after hard work, just as he wanted, suddenly exploded. That's how she got the mana burns and was now in this state. If it weren't for him, the name of the blacksmith of the remaining wild dog Louise, scarred for life, was indeed Barmouth. So Hans was that blacksmith. His first goal in this life was to quickly establish contact with the 3 dogs and guide them. The dogs wouldn't need him. He smiled and understood, because if he didn't let Hans misbehave, the wild dog wouldn't go astray. Sometime later, in the Borsip faculty conference room, someone started shouting, "Do they really want to make student Sehong the best graduate of the faculty?" Professors from other faculties looked at him in bewilderment and asked, "Is he serious?" Even if so, it was a bit wrong. Yunha asked again, "Did she really hear any objections?" One of the professors said no, absolutely not. And she said it was more advice than objections. Michael said that, after all, not much time had passed since she took office. Yunha frowned at him, and he said that everything was correct, and that they understood that the student's weapon was impressive, but perhaps they should examine it more closely. Inchul remarked that the professors were saying this because they hadn't seen student Sehong's flame accumulator sheath. Perhaps they lacked refinement in execution, but considering the method of mana utilization and compatibility with the 5-year-old flame blade, everything would be different. One of the professors adjusted his glasses and said, "Well, that's surprising, but frankly, I wonder how true it is." Yunha remarked that this weapon was likely less than 60% complete from what student Sehong had originally envisioned. It was precisely this imperfection that would make it promising. If, even after seeing student Sehong's presentation as the top graduate, they couldn't accept her decision, then she would resign as dean. This news stunned everyone in the hall. 54 years ago, the heavens failed to save the Tower of Heroes for the sake of human evolution. In response to the pandemonium swamp that defiled all life, even though they gained new opportunities, a great calamity was born, and Babylon was born in this flood. The greatest academy in history, founded in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Babylon has returned countless heroes to this day. The current Emperor Ludwig declared that they too would become one of them, standing in the arena. They must be diligent, all of them who came here to Babylon, such is their duty as heroes. Sehong also listened to the emperor. At first glance, he seemed such a pleasant person, though he is not exactly a kind old man. The host announced that next would be a demonstration of this year's best students, and he asked the best students from each faculty to come up on stage. Sehong paused, thinking, the best student from each faculty. In his past life, he always wondered why so many guys acted so arrogant just because of their success at the academy. And so they began their demonstration. Sehong walked onto the stage with many other guys and realized that, looking at them, he was beginning to understand why they were acting that way. He felt good about being there. The host announced that the item being used in this demonstration was a golem, created by the Automaton Model 9 Puppet Factory. This creature's combat capabilities allow it to fight a hero of equal rank. Sehong wondered with a smile, What kind of automaton is it? If it has no weapons, does it possess martial arts? The host announced that this was their first performance. The first demonstration would be given by their best student, Jake. He looked ahead with a smile, and the performance began. Sehong wondered, Jake, the third son of the Myers family? He had heard that he was an eccentric who practices martial arts, despite coming from a family known for its sword techniques, and apparently that was true. At that moment, Jake began fighting the golem, and the host shouted that they were starting the demonstration right now. The golem rushed toward Jake to defeat him, but just then, he was able to dodge. The golem didn't give up and continued to expend its strength, swinging it around. Jake backed away and realized it was his turn. He kicked off the ground and sprinted straight at the golem, swung his fist, and struck the creature squarely in the chest. The surrounding people were dumbfounded when they saw what happened after his strike. Sehong heard a strange sound and wondered what it was. He clearly heard that he died young, at rank A, somewhere in his early 20s. At that moment, the golem was thrown back, but Sehong knew that with his level, he was a genius of the kind that only appeared in Babylon once a decade. Why had he only reached rank A in his past life? He was stunned by the horror he experienced, and the announcer declared that this was the end. Jake easily smashed the golem into pieces, and various parts of the creature scattered across the arena. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and said with a smile that he hadn't warmed up like this in a long time. The host didn't even know how to react and declared that it was a truly magnificent demonstration. Student Jake. He defeated an automaton with the combat assistance of a C-rank hero in a single breath. Everything went as expected from the best cadet of the Akarkuf. Sehong realized that he really turned up the heat from the start, and the next speaker would certainly feel serious pressure. The host announced that the best student of the support faculty would perform next, and student Erica would lead the demonstration. Sehong understood that she was the best at this level, so how could there be any pressure? Erica is the eldest daughter of the Inoue family, one of the 3 great families of Japan. She was not a conqueror of the highest heights, but made a name for herself as a C-rank hero who wielded mythical class armament. However, she ultimately transformed into a Majane and was personally eliminated by her own family. Since she would transform in the future, getting close to her would bring him no good. At that moment, Erica turned to look at him and met his eyes. He froze, clutching his head. Did she just look at him? The presenter announced that the automaton for this demonstration was Model 9, with consecrated armor. Its defense was approximately 1.5 times greater than the previous model. What kind of performance would student Erica give them? She picked up her bird's cage and, releasing it, ordered them to move forward. The bird burst from its cage and began cawing loudly. Sehong realized it was a crow and was surprised. The crow aimed at the golem, which it was prepared to attack. Sehong thought the automaton had assumed a defensive stance. In this position, it would be difficult to penetrate, especially since it was a defensive type. Erica tensed and transformed the bird into a huge monster with iron body parts. The crow rushed to fill the automaton, and Sehong was dumbfounded when he saw sparks begin to emerge from the golem. Erica called the bird to her and returned it to her hand. The host shouted that it was simply incredible and stunning. The enhanced automaton fell in a single blow, and she had pierced through an enemy of the hero-level rank. Everyone shouted congratulations, and Sehong realized that with this atmosphere, simply showing off his weapon and calling it a day would be completely misunderstood. The presenter announced that the best student from the Borsit Faculty of Technology was finally entering the arena. Ludwig, the leader of the graduates' demonstration, said that the level of the top graduates this time was very high. They hadn't had a top graduate from the forging department in a long time. Wouldn't the pressure be too much for him? Eun-ha was also among the judges, serving as the second leader of the demonstration. She understood that there would be no problems. The host wondered if he could put on a performance that would surpass the shocking performances of cadets Jake and Erica. His heart was already trembling with excitement. The surrounding students shouted that he was handsome, and at that moment, Sehong drew his sword, and the system announced that it was a blade of 5-colored fire and required a flame accumulator. People were surprised. Is this a rare rank? It's highly unusual for the forging department. Besides, the fact that a first year created a rank 1 weapon is already astounding, but compared to other departments, it lacks the showmanship. Doesn't he look clumsy for such a rank? Well, the other departments looked quite impressive after all. However, they're unsure how he's going to show it off in action and demonstration. They weren't expecting anything grand, and Michael, hearing this gossip, realized the heavens were on his side. At this rate, the dean's position would be his. Eun-ha watched silently, and the host announced that for this demonstration, Model 10 possessed combat power equivalent to a D-rank hero. But Sehong turned and said, "No, Model 8, please let them equip it with armor." The host didn't understand what he was saying. Model 8 could withstand a hero's attacks in some cases, and he was asking for it to be equipped with armor as well. He was surprised and said that it was difficult to prepare this in such a short time. Was he really trying to disrupt the demonstration? Inchul announced that he had prepared this in advance. This automaton was equipped with armor. They were surprised that he already had it, and at that moment, Sehong prepared for the fight and looked at Inchul, who was confident in him, and told him to go all out. The host raised his hand and said, "Let the duel begin then." He was already confused, and at that moment, the duel began. Inchul watched closely, as did Eun-ha, who wished him well. Sehong wondered if he would live up to his expectations. He swung his weapon and used multicolored mana. When he did this, the people around him were surprised. This was madness. Hans was upset that this was all just a show and had no substance. What could a guy with little mana do anyway? The flames contained in the blade of 5-colored fire tend to conflict with each other, and this explosion can injure the owner if not controlled with a significant amount of mana. But using the properties of the accumulators and flames to store fire within and then release crimson flames with the newly available skill is something else entirely. He announced that the accumulation was complete and used wildfire. When he made this move, everyone was horrified. The weapon skill needed for the accumulator and flames, wildfire, detonates the compressed mana within. If he activated it in this state, the forcibly compressed 5-colored fire demons would burst forth all at once. Michael was stunned, surprised, and tensed. The host also didn't understand what the psycho was doing. Sehong appeared unharmed when the dust cleared, and he sheathed his sword. When he exhaled, he wondered if he had overdone it. The complete devastation of the arena appeared before him, and the host didn't even know what to say. He shouted for the construction support group to come to the central hall immediately. The demonstration of the best students from the departments. The midterm assessment is over. Sometime later, Yoon-ha came into Sehong's room, opening the door and apologizing for being late. She'd called him herself, but she'd been helping clean the arena. He scratched his head and said no, he should apologize. He's sorry for causing such a mess in the central hall. He should have controlled his power better. Yoon-ha asked, "What was he talking about, Sehong?" he asked, puzzled. Didn't she call him to scold him? She looked at him questioningly and said, "Of course not." That was the reason she'd called him. But suddenly her stomach rumbled and he froze. She cleared her throat and said she meant she'd pay him 10 times the market price. Would he agree to sell her the 5-colored flame blade and flame accumulator scabbard? He looked surprised and asked, "What?" The system reported that a connection had been established with Yoon-ha's target. She said it was an amazing set of weapons, and he wondered if this had already happened. Before regression, it only set in after he fed her weapons many times. He thanked her and realized that in any case, this was an excellent opportunity. At that moment, he used Fate Extraction and targeted Yoon-ha. Fate is a gluttonous iron that generates heat when absorbing other iron, corroding the iron it touches, and inserting the core into itself. It feeds on iron to create mineral blood. Sehong received the magic ball in his hand and said that it was ready. Yoon-ha asked if he would sell it to her. He replied no, and Yoon-ha said that he had just said it was ready. At that moment, Inchul turned to the dean outside the door and entered, saying that the head of the academy had ordered the awards ceremony to begin immediately. Could he take Cadet Sehong with him? She turned around and, looking down, said she understood. Sehong, leaving the office, said they'd see each other later and slammed the door behind him. Yoon-ha's stomach rumbled again, and she remained silent in the room. The heart of Babylon Academy, the old main building of the Marduk mansion. Everyone was gathered there and in disgrace. And Inchul led Sehong, telling him to treat the academy president with respect. Not only had he generously handled the issue of trashing the hall during the demonstration, but he was also a perfect man on a different level than them. All he told him was that he needn't worry, and he entered. Ludwig, who greeted him, said he must be a cadet. He was the ruling emperor of the academy. Before his regression, he was a hero who died alone fighting against a heavenly god, exterminating one of his 6 demon gods. Sehong realized that everything was expected of a perfectionist. Ludwig said that all the weapons he showed at today's demonstration were interesting. He couldn't say he didn't regret it, but he had high hopes for them. Sehong was surprised. What did he mean by regret? He was ready, but he wanted to throw the 5-year fireblade and flame accumulator scabbard into the furnace. He said that as a tribute to his talent and effort, he would give him 2 rewards. Let him say what he needed. Sehong was surprised and said he wanted a reward that would increase his mana and accumulation capacity. Ludwig thought for a moment and created a heavy inkstone and a dream tusk. Sehong understood what it was, as it was very difficult to find. It would be difficult to manage now, but he had an idea how to use it. Ludwig asked if he liked it. Sehong replied that it was perfect. After a while, he asked what he was thinking. To think that he was the only one to receive rewards, and that was unlike him. Ludwig replied that he simply gave them to him because this guy had the ability to handle them. This creature asked, "Is that so?" He had the feeling that he was like an old man. Ludwig replied that this only meant there was enough depth within him that even he could see him that way. And even he can't fathom this depth. Sometime later, Sehong arrived at the university and, when he entered the office, saw someone waving at him. One of the guys turned to Hans and asked where he wanted to have lunch. He apologized and said he had plans with some upperclassmen today. The guy was dumbfounded. Plans with the best 3rd-year student in the department? He replied that they were simply close and saw each other often, and he said he would give him some advice about life at the academy. The guy asked if he could go with him, when suddenly Sehong burst into the office and glared at them ominously. The room fell silent, and Sehong and Hans exchanged glances. Hans couldn't understand what was happening to his eyes. Sehong felt like this guy understood his place, and Hans got angry and wished a curse on this commoner. At that moment, the professor entered and told everyone to sit down. It looks like everyone's here, and since this is the first lesson, they'll begin their introductions. This ingot is a material called projection alloy. It's tens of times more sensitive to mana than ordinary ores, so if he channels mana like this, the weapon he presented is easily created. Si-Hong realized he deserved to be among the world's top 100 craftsmen. However, he'd sensed this even during the test with the Stone of Fate. This guy is a true master. Chul suggested saying that this sensitivity makes it difficult to use as a weapon, but it reflects unconscious traits that allow one to see oneself from the outside. That's why weapons made from projection alloy are called clones. The forging department's self-presentation will be replaced by the creation of these clones. They'll be on display in the main building for a week, so they should work hard. All the students responded that they understood the order, and he wondered if such a quantity of projection alloy would cost more than 10 million won apiece. As expected from Babylon, even the self-presentation was grand. Se-Hong exhaled and realized there was no one here with the most important talent. At that moment, he said, "Then Se-Hong will be the last." He was surprised and realized that since he was already the top graduate in his department, there was no need to hide his strength. If that were the case, maybe he should give it his all. A moment later, an explosion rocked the university auditorium, and windows blew out of the building. After some time, the guys entered the room and realized it was crowded. They assumed it was because of Se-Hong. It was funny to hear them talk about his incredible level and all that, considering he was only a first year. The guys were gossiping about it when they suddenly froze. Although an anomaly had occurred during the manufacturing process, which absorbed 19 nearby projection alloys, they considered this in itself a demonstration of Se-Hong's abilities, so they presented the work as is. The guys exchanged puzzled glances and realized it was probably a fluke caused by skill. But couldn't it be because he used multiple projection alloys? They hadn't had a top student in the forging department for a long time. They probably wanted to make him look like a genius. Erica arrived and said she thought differently. Jake, next to her, spoke up, and so did he. It seemed the long series of projection alloys wasn't enough to reflect Se-Hong's potential. After some time, Se-Hong worked hard to forge a new weapon. Those around him asked, were they keeping track of the time? He still hadn't been off by even 1/100th of a second. Han, who was standing nearby, wondered what they could possibly teach such a guy. He should just let him pass. When the end of the class was announced, Se-Hong had crafted a multitude of weapons and exhaled. He looked at it thoughtfully and, swinging his hammer, decided to break it when Han suddenly approached him and asked if he was really going to break it. He turned around in surprise, and Han said they had to hand them in after the packaging class this week, so he didn't need to break it. Se-Hong asked again, "What do you mean hand them in?" He replied, "Where does he think the student budget comes from? Babylon allocates funds based on weapons sales to the outside world. So what exactly is he dissatisfied with now? His body or his mana?" Se-Hong replied with a smile that he was currently dissatisfied with his body. To make training tools, he needed to forge them and a heavy inkstone, but he didn't have the stamina to even try. Han suggested that if forging was necessary, wouldn't enhancement produce results faster than physical training? At that moment, it seemed as if an epiphany had struck Se-Hong, and he realized he hadn't even thought about it, having avoided it before his regression. Since he had returned to the past, he lacked stamina. He could simply work on the heavy inkstone under the effect of enhancement. He bowed to Han and thanked him for the advice. He replied, "You're welcome," and Se-Hong remarked that they were using too much mana when forging and needed to reduce it to 70% of their current level and focus their strikes on one point. That would be better. Surprised by this decision, he asked again, "Did a first year just give advice to an assistant?" He silently turned to the hammer and paused. Babylon encourages each individual student to train independently. Se-Hong found himself near the train and continued to ponder how people can attend classes from other departments or take dozens of courses in a single semester. However, a student is required to complete courses in their major, and if they earn 3 failing grades, they are immediately expelled. They have freedom, but they must be responsible for their choices. The support department station. Se-Hong exited the train and saw Erica standing in front of him. She turned around in surprise, and the guy next to her told her not to block the aisle and to move. He didn't understand who they were or where they came from, then said that they should move. The guys got angry, and Erica stood silently and looked at him in bewilderment. She asked where he was going. He said he wanted to go to the support department and wanted to know if he could take something as an extra subject. She said she would walk him there, and her friend was stunned by this offer and became angry. After all, they had another meeting after this. She told him to go there on his own. The guy said that the upperclassmen had said they really wanted to see her, but Erica said she wasn't interested, and the guys clutched their heads in surprise. Erica silently followed Se-Hong, and after a while asked what kind of supplementary item he was looking for. Se-Hong said he wanted to learn about reinforcement, and she asked what kind exactly. He replied that it was something that increased physical ability and didn't interfere with forging. She smirked and asked, "Then what about barrier art?" Sehong asked. Isn't that specialized in defense? Erica pulled an envelope from her jacket and said, for example, he should try this. He took the envelope in his hands and wondered if it increased durability. No, rather, it retained its original properties, but hardened under strong impact. He said the technique was well suited for forging because it required fine control. Erica noted that for such complex applications, he would probably need the professor's help. By the way, this spell formula seems somehow familiar. Erica said that the barrier professor had entered her family's branch through marriage, so she could introduce him personally if he wanted. In exchange, she received an invitation, but before she could finish her sentence, Sehong suddenly did everything correctly, and she was dumbfounded when the chains broke. Erica wondered in her mind. Surprised, he understood the essence of her family's barrier art in such a short time and destroyed it. She couldn't tell him anything, and Sehong said that barrier art was indeed useful, and he thanked her for the advice. He was going to sign up for classes, so let her go grab a bite with those guys who were chasing her. The guys ran up to her and asked if she was okay. Sehong answered, invitation, and she gave it to him. The support faculty. The protagonist entered and heard someone discussing why Erica was with someone from another faculty. It seemed they had seen them together yesterday. Come to think of it, at the last exhibition, everything was exactly the same. The protagonist realized that, as expected, false rumors would spread. But why were they so interested in other people's affairs? If Erica truly had feelings for him, a connection would have already been established. In any case, are they choosing who to accept into the classes? He applied, but was told to take a test first. They approached, and Erica mentioned that a barrier creation test was taking place, and Sehong asked, is this really happening in this forest? They looked around and saw two students who didn't understand what was happening or where to find it. Sehong wondered if they were testing for treasure. This irritated him. They hid something behind a barrier, and suddenly he stepped on the ground and saw a magical dome in front of him. One of the students announced that the test had been passed, and no one understood how it had happened. After some time, Professor Robert, of the Barrier Department of the Support Faculty, asked if the young lady had shown interest in the best student of the Borsip faculty. His subordinate replied, yes, let him take a look at it. He showed his phone screen and said he'd been wondering why she'd suddenly signed up for the basic lecture. The professor, clutching his head, said that thanks to this, the number of applicants had increased, but he wasn't happy about it. Young Master Inoue had also requested a test be added this year using the existing labyrinth. The labyrinth disorients souls, a barrier that distorts senses and causes confusion. It's a basic barrier, but someone ignorant of magic wouldn't even be able to detect it. It helped him. And yet, he'd broken through his labyrinth of disorienting souls using nothing but superfluous instincts. The professor announced that they'd all passed when he gathered the students around him. Now they would assign classes using the second test. One of the students raised his hand and said he'd go first. He knew this was his chance to attract Erica's attention. The professor said, excellent. Second test? They must break the active barrier in front of them using only mana. He'd be judging them based on time, so they needed to act quickly and precisely. Let him begin. A web-shaped barrier with a spider as their target. Sensing mana moving within the web, the spider flees endlessly, and as long as this barrier exists, it will endlessly regenerate. The boy became angry when he realized that capturing the entire spell formula with his standard mana method wasn't enough. In that case, he would crush it with speed. At that moment, golden sparks began to emanate from the web, and the professor said, 2 minutes, 23 seconds. He needed to pay more attention to understanding the structure, but this was not bad. Erica looked at him silently, and he felt ashamed and thanked the professor. After a while, all the boys tried it but were very tired. They would all start in the basic class. Erica would go next. When Erica began the task, she managed to destroy the web after a short moment. Those around her were surprised. How did she manage to do it so quickly? Had she analyzed the entire spell formula and destroyed it? Erica looked at her hands, and the boys muttered, so that's how she's the best student in the department. Robert said 22 seconds. Good, but the standard analysis method would probably be 2 seconds faster. She said she'd take that into account, and now Sehong was last in line. He didn't look like anyone special, and they'd find out. A moment later, Sehong squatted next to the web, and no one understood what he was doing. Maybe he didn't know the test had begun? Sehong thought that this barrier had properties similar to the heavy inkstone. If it didn't reach a certain point, the approach state returned. He set the stone ablaze proportionally. The professor came and asked what he was doing. Erica extended her hand and told him to leave it. The professor listened to her, then walked away. Sehong continued to ponder. What if he could contain the accumulated stimulation in the heavy inkstone? At that moment, the spider glowed brightly, and all the boys silently watched. Sehong declared that everything was ready, and that he could now work on the heavy black stone. When he stood up, he silently stepped aside, and all the students looked at him in shock. One of them reported that it took 7 minutes and 45 seconds. But the professor realized that no matter how long it only took him 7 minutes this time. But next time, he would destroy it in seconds. He hadn't simply dismantled the barrier, he had created a formula to destroy it. Combine his blacksmithing skills with magic, and he dreaded what he would be capable of. Sometime later, an email arrived in the forging department. They had received a request for a mid-level forging using high-quality materials or a first-level upper circle from Sehong's disciple. According to the workshop safety regulations, anyone wishing to supervise is requested to contact them. The Babylon Administrative Department. One of the office staff wondered how many would show up this time. Several messages arrived, and he said the responses had come quickly, and not a single message from Vice Dean Michael. Rumor has it that the atmosphere has become tense because his son was demoted to second place, and it seems true. Then he will begin to choose. At that moment, he was dumbfounded when he saw a message from the dean stating that he would personally oversee the forging of student Sehong. When the protagonist entered the room, Yoonha said that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Student Sehong. He looked at her questioningly, and she asked, "He must be very busy. Why is he here?" As dean, she came here to test the student's skills. He said that since this is how it turned out, he will have to try hard. Forging the heavy inkstone is the first stage. There are many ways to process the heavy inkstone, but the most difficult of them is the dark curtain method. The heavy inkstone is placed in a dark space without light. The darkness spreads like water, and with the help of the stone's mana alone, it is separated from the impurities. In this process, the size of the heavy inkstone decreases, but the frequency of its occurrence increases. It's easy for him to say, but it's practically a reconstruction of matter. Yoonha was stunned, and Sehong wondered if 1/4 was his limit. If he lowered his stats any further, his productivity would be insufficient. Stage 2. His hand glowed with magical light, and he began forging. He channeled mana through the crimson flames to filter only the appropriate fire. Stabilized flames create flowing wild flames, which retain their temperature from the moment they are formed. Stage 3. Strike the heavy inkstone with a hammer, infused with poison, flowing wild flames. The key is to continue until the distortion diminishes, thanks to its properties. Yoonha wondered if even being immune to flames didn't mean he couldn't feel pain. Just how much had he been exhausting himself all this time? Sehong continued to work, and after a while, evening arrived. Yoonha began to yawn, realizing that 4 hours of forging had passed. The properties of the heavy inkstone, having absorbed the flames to their limit, were changing. Everything was ready, and the distortions stopped. He needed to melt the processed heavy inkstone and pour it into a pre-prepared mold. Yoonha, who was watching, asked, "Is this casting, not forging?" The properties would change due to the darkness within the mold. What was he even thinking? She was puzzled by each step. At the 4th step, she suddenly shouted at him to stop. Sehong smiled and ignored her, contemplating slowing the changes in the heavy inkstone, using the barrier-breaking formula, and using this interval to build a magic circuit. That's what he needed. A moment later, a powerful explosion occurred, and the system reported that the ink spider bracelet armament was complete. To break prejudice, a daring challenge was needed, one that spared no one. Although the material's potential had not been fully realized, the blacksmith's skill in forging new possibilities was worthy of being called first-rate. He acquired the D-rank Black Spirit Thread skill. Sehong sighed with fatigue and, looking at the bracelet he'd received, was surprised and delighted. It absorbed and accumulated the wearer's mana and also allowed the use of a mana-exploding ring. In his opinion, this was a success. Yoonha, who approached him in shock, opened her mouth, then suddenly blushed and remained silent. Sehong sighed again in relief, and Yoonha asked if this was a resonance phenomenon. She thought it was quite impressive. Sehong confirmed that it was, although it wasn't that strong, but if done correctly, they could count on the effect of the set. He apologized for not being able to provide her with weapons when she ran into trouble because of him, and didn't know if this would be enough to cover the aftertaste. But let her at least take this. He looked into her eyes, and now Yoonha had gained the unique skill of properly baking souls. She said it was quite edible, and he asked, "Is it true?" She said yes, but compared to that, it tasted like fried crumbs. He thought it was generous. It had already become a habit to make things to Yoonha's liking. With this, he could easily increase his connection level, and was glad that she liked everything. Yoonha replied that, of course, she was a little offended if such items were right in front of her. And by the way, when did he plan to deal with the 5-colored flame blade and flame accumulator scabbard? He replied that he wasn't going to sell them right now, and she asked again, was the price unacceptable to him? Sehong mockingly said that he was going to keep them to prepare for his subjugation lessons. And there's a saying that hunger is the best seasoning. As soon as he had equipment worthy of passing it on to her, he would let her know. Yoonha blushed and replied that she would look forward to it. Was that the end of the forging? Sehong replied, yes, and then they decided to leave because the staff would come and clean up. Sehong didn't have the energy left for cleaning, and for him, this was a relief. Suddenly, he felt something was wrong and began to fall. When Yoonha suddenly grabbed him in her arms, she asked fearfully, "Is he okay?" The protagonist replied that he thought he had slightly misjudged his endurance, and Yoonha decided to walk him back to the dorm. Is he afraid of heights? He didn't have time to respond before she suddenly grabbed him in her arms and said they were going now. She jumped straight from the window, and Sehong, clutching her neck, exclaimed in fear. She wondered if the casting she had just consumed had really released such power. Sehong realized that in many ways, The situation had changed dramatically compared to before the regression. Erica stood in front of the building, wondering if Se-hong was here yet. She should extend the invitation to him. Sometime later, a question was asked on the free bulletin board of the Babylon Academy forging department. Why is this man here? Wasn't that the best first-year student in the department, standing in front of the main building of the forging department for 3 hours? It was Erica, and everyone was discussing it, not understanding what was going on. Wasn't she waiting for the best student of the Borsip faculty? She was waiting for him at the dorm. When Se-hong saw this reasoning, he thought that if it was something important, she would come to him again. When the door opened, a teacher entered and said that he was pleased to meet them. Starting today, he would teach a class on understanding combat, and his name was Ricardo. First, they would move to the training center, and the last person to arrive would run 20 laps. He knocked on the door and told everyone to move forward. No one understood why this was so sudden, but they rushed for the exit. Se-hong was surprised. Wasn't this a theoretical class? They told him that no one knew anything, he should just run. He was the last one running, not understanding what was happening. When the required time passed and many of the guys stopped, Ricardo said that it was 20 laps. Se-hong continued running without stopping, and the guys commented that his stamina was really at rock bottom. I wonder if he even got through the intermediate forging properly? Now they should pay attention to him. Equipment comprehension was originally a theoretical subject about weapons structure, but the recent Flameblade hunt changed their methods. The attack on blacksmiths creating heroic rank fire attribute blades was called the Flameblade hunt. Even before his regression, it was an unsolved case. No matter what defense they prepare, in the end, only their own bodies remain. Therefore, by studying equipment comprehension in this class, they will also master self-defense techniques. The boys rejoiced and shouted back, "Yes, sir." Ricardo raised his hand and said, "Okay, today they'll focus on swords." This time, Se-hong realized he needed to be more careful. To do this, he first needed to increase his stamina, which he did himself, but the effectiveness was certainly impressive. The explosive ring skill manipulates gravity within a 1-meter radius around the user. His stats had increased by an average of 5. By the end of his first year, he'd make this body usable, no matter the cost. At that moment, Ricardo called him over and told him to stop running and come here. Se-hong used his explosive ring and froze, then approached the instructor and realized he was in better shape than he thought. Ricardo handed him a sword and told him to give it a couple of swings, and he'd see if it was suitable for his training. Se-hong took the sword in his hands and considered the bracelet, wondering if it would be difficult to move properly and if this technique wasn't very effective, but he should try it. He began fighting Ricardo, and the others around him were discussing whether he was really slow and exhausted after just a short run, but his form was still good. Richard smiled and realized it was perfect. He knew less about the path he had to take. However, he was rushing too much. It would be better to point this out and move on. At that moment, Se-hong was as frantic as Ricardo when he chopped off his arm with the sword. Ricardo cried out in pain, confused. Had he just been scared by a tech cadet? Had it happened so intensely that he was hallucinating? He asked, "Who taught him to fence like that?" Se-hong smiled and said, "Did it really work?" He'd said he'd created this technique in 10 minutes. He'd repay him next time. He recalled his old acquaintance who'd replied that there were times in people's lives when they had no money, so why rush? Technique instead of money. What about technique? He will teach him. Let him stop. Se-hong scratched his head and said he'd just watched videos of other heroes' battles. Richard mentioned fencing. Was he interested in learning it for real? He'd write him a letter of recommendation for a lecture on body control at Akar Kuf. That same day, Se-hong found himself in that very same department and silently looked at the teacher. He yelled at the guy, "How many times do I have to tell you that I have nothing to teach them?" He was the foot of a guy who begged him to please stop being like that. He was a retired C-rank hero and a regular customer. His name was Swordbreaker Kwang-soo. Se-hong realized that the guy with a gambling addiction and constant drinking was a professor. Kwang-soo turned around and asked who he was. Se-hong handed over a letter of recommendation and said that his name was Se-hong, a first-year student in the forging department, and that he had transferred on the recommendation of Professor Ricardo. Kwang-soo looked closely at the letter and asked, "Ricardo recommended him?" His student whispered in his ear that the guy was the best student in the department this year. But how could he not look at him? He looked so mediocre. Kwang-soo asked, "Does he really want to learn from him?" The guy exclaimed, "Yes," and at that moment the professor pointed a finger at Se-hong and said that if he defeated that guy, he would accept him. They needed one duel, and the one who lands the first clean blow would win. He raised his hand and said, "Then, let's begin." Se-hong tensed and prepared to attack. Kwang-soo wondered if his relaxed state really guaranteed him colossal flexibility at the expense of strength. In that case, the correct approach would be to grab him rather than strike. The guy tried to strike him, but Kwang-soo, watching, wondered why he hated guys who were so good at something. Before they'd even gotten to know each other, they were starting to clash, and he wasn't interested in watching. Suddenly, Se-hong lunged at the guy and punched him in the chest. He didn't understand what kind of power that was, but a moment later, he used an explosive ring, which stunned the guy. They both fell to the ground, and Se-hong grunted in pain, clenching his fist. The guy opened his eyes and saw his bloody and broken nose, and Se-hong asked, He was a little faster, right? He lay on the floor, smiling, confident. An awkward silence ensued between them, and the guy said that was true. But before he could finish his sentence, Kwang-soo exclaimed, "Let everyone get out." He remembered that he promised to start training him if he won, and Sehong asked, since he had defeated him, maybe he should train this guy instead of him? He was surprised to think that a better student, Akar Kuf, lost to a student, Borsip. It sounded simply pathetic. Kwang-soo said that he really did think he would have to make something worthwhile out of this idiot to earn his keep. The guy tensed up, and Kwang-soo said that he would set a time and inform him, so he should come. The student exclaimed in surprise, and thanked the professor, who told him that if he was finished, he should get out of here, because he needed to discuss something with this guy alone. When they faced each other, the professor told him to show him the sword technique he used against Rikaro. Sehong understood, and, after a moment, focused before rushing into the attack. Kwang-soo easily defeated his opponent, and declared it a one-swing kill. The idea was good, but the execution was crude. Does he consider fencing normal if it becomes a weakness after the second use? If someone taught this to others and said it was perfect, he would break their limbs. And this from the person who taught this technique. Sehong chuckled, and Kwang-soo said he should just wait and see, because he would make his body perfectly suited to this technique. Sehong asked, "So he's enrolled in the class, right?" Kwang-soo asked again. "What? Yeah, right." Sehong bowed and said that then he was leaving for today. The professor realized the boy was so reserved, and when Sehong left the office, he remarked that he was acting arrogant despite being an ordinary teacher. A student he knew ran up to him, and Sehong asked, "Haven't you left yet?" He handed him the envelopes and said he wanted to give him something. It was an invitation to the elite, a place where students from prestigious families gathered. Erica planned to give it to him. It was full of arrogant idiots, but he thought it would be a good opportunity for him. Sehong thought for a moment and replied that he didn't know if he should just accept something like that, and the boy replied that thanks to him, he got into the class and should at least thank him this way. Sehong thanked him for that. The extra classes he had enrolled in so far were barrier creation and body control. He wanted to take a class from the Borsip faculty. Right now, curses, alchemy, and enchantment came to mind. Suddenly, electricity began to flow from his bracelet, and he didn't understand what was happening. A student grabbed his arm and asked if he had really done that. He replied, "What if I had?" She asked again if she could enchant it for him. The system reported that a connection had been established with Leah's target. Leah is a girl who can raise the rank of a weapon by 2 whole levels through enchantment. She is a genius among geniuses who have created legendary weapons. She's also the person who is said to have shaken the enchantment industry. She exclaimed, "Could this really be a rare rank heavy inkstone? If she adds a few formulas? No, it's too wonderful to end here. What should she do about this problem?" She grabbed her head and began to fidget. And Sehong, who was sitting opposite her drinking coffee, was surprised. Who would have thought she was such an oddball, and asked, "Is the weapon bad?" She replied that the problem was that she wanted to do too much with it. It was made of heavy inkstone, so why was the compatibility so good? She could insert so many formulas that she couldn't choose. He replied that if that was the case, then everything was fine and put the mug on the table. Leah looked into his eyes in surprise, and he said there was something else. There was a resonance phenomenon, so she should keep that in mind. She was dumbfounded and asked, "Who the hell is he?" Sehong gave his name and said he was a first year in the forging department and also the top student in the Borsip faculty this year. She asked again, "A first year?" That was astonishing. She was a third year in the enchanting department. At that moment, a guy approached them, slammed his fist on the table, and said he needed to talk to them, so they should step away for a minute. Sehong realized it was Erica's lackey, and at that moment, Lee rose from her seat and quietly walked away. She asked again, "Can't he see that they're actually talking?" He said he wanted to resolve this quietly, so he asked for just a minute. Sehong told him to speak here, and the student said he should apologize for being rude to Miss Erica. He tore up the invitation Miss Erica had given him right in front of everyone. Sehong replied, "Well, Miss Erica had told him to tear it up herself." The guy replied, "Of course, that would make sense if he hadn't received the invitation from Jake." Sehong asked again, "Did Erica send him?" He replied that he was here on his own. Lee adjusted her glasses and, smiling, said, "Yes, of course. Who doesn't know that he's the young master's servant?" The guy was dumbfounded. How dare some loser treat him like that? Suddenly, a flash of light erupted between them. He may think he's special now, but Babylon is full of people who are far superior to him. Sehong asked if he was talking about himself. The guy yelled at him to shut up and used his magical powers, causing Sehong to put out his hand to protect himself and Lee. She was dumbfounded when he easily negated the attack and said that, as he thought, it wasn't just mana. He used daggers as a conduit for the attack, even if it was an illusion. The guy couldn't figure out how he'd figured that out before, and Sehong replied, "Who knows, but it looks delicious." At that moment, the system reported that the gluttonous iron had been activated. The guy exclaimed, his 1 million in one. Sehong chuckled and said the taste was simply delicious. Gluttonous iron is iron that generates heat when absorbing other iron, which corrodes the iron it touches and embeds its core within itself. He also used an explosive ring, after which he turned on his opponent and punched him in the chest. The guy was thrown aside, and a moment later, a loud roar erupted, causing him to fall to his knees. After destroying his opponent, Sehong turned to Leah and asked, "So, senior, are there any lectures in the enchantment department she could recommend?" She looked surprised, then said it was ancient enchantment, and there was an amazing senior named Leah there. After a while, the guy clutched his side from the attack and was surprised at such a quick reaction from a first year. A girl approached him, apologized, and said she wanted to see the dagger. It was Erica, and he exclaimed, "Since when did she appear here?" He handed her the dagger, and she said there was no need to report this to her brother. She would speak with the head of the family separately. He scratched his head and replied, "Okay." Erica thought, as expected, that the weapon used as a catalyst was engraved with anti-theft charms. Could he have created a counter skill based on Professor Roberts and her magic? Sehong, his forging affinity might even be higher than rank C. She'd have to raise his magical affinity rating to A. After some time, it was reported that he had established a connection with Erica's target. He wondered, what was that? Was she spying on him, fighting that subordinate? At least he'd received adequate compensation. Using it as is was crude, but combined with the black spirit thread, it should do the trick. In any case, he was so looking forward to Professor Inchul's class, but to think he'd have to listen to boring theories he already knew all day. Inchul said the explanation seemed sufficient, so they'd get down to business. Even if it was the same metal, its form would completely change depending on the changing mana structure. When he used this spell, who said that the use of metal deformation is what defines a universal weapon? Therefore, if a blacksmith student is a blacksmith, they must perfectly understand the potential of the metal they work with. Today, they will practice metal deformation using these iron ingots. First, they must alter the structure of the Roman to create holes about 3 centimeters deep in the center of the ingot. This material has been tuned to respond precisely to deformation, so they must handle it carefully. The time limit is 10 minutes. Now they can begin. No one understood why this was happening, and could it really not return to its original shape? The students were having trouble, when suddenly, Sehong and Hans managed to do it simultaneously, and place the stones on the table. Inchul announced that they could move on to the next stage. He would show them the structure as an example, and they should try applying it. Hans mused that the speed and final appearance seemed like he could win this time. Inchul announced that this structure was next. When he pointed this out, Sehong silently looked at the floor, and Hans shouted that this was his turn. He would do everything perfectly for everyone to see. At that moment, Inchul said his name and asked him to try to return the iron ingot to its original form. Hans asked again, "What? Why was the mana structure completely destroyed?" Inchul replied that the iron trace couldn't withstand the deformation just carried out, meaning the processing method was flawed from the start. Hans replied that he was simply doing what the professor told them, and Inchul remarked that he had previously mentioned that they must perfectly understand the metal's potential. Hans stood silently and heard the professor continue to say that if the altered structure can't be restored, the equipment isn't deformed, but damaged. This becomes a significant change to its quality and characteristics, so they should carefully review this part in the future. Hans became upset and replied that he would remember everything, when Sehong suddenly wondered if he hadn't noticed. No, maybe he was just lucky while he was daydreaming, but everything was working. After some time, the boys were discussing. Didn't he say it wouldn't work? It simply couldn't be. When Inchul suddenly said in surprise, "Student Sehong, could he show them the deformation he just performed again?" Sehong misled him, saying it was possible, because this iron ingot was adapted for students. It couldn't be done with a regular iron ingot. Inchul replied that everything was clear and that it was possible because the ingot was finely tuned. He thought about it, to think that even he had overlooked this. A conqueror of peaks and the greatest holy flame blacksmith, he created this during his time as a hero-ranked hero, and in the decades that followed, it had never been refuted. The deformation formula underlying the work of blacksmiths, iron truths. He couldn't have found another way, right? Did he really think this guy could do such a thing? If he noticed it now, it would be the second time. After a while, the class ended, and Inchul turned to Sehong and asked if he had a minute. He turned around and asked what was wrong. Inchul replied that it was a gift to celebrate his admission, as Babylon had helped him so much. It was a crimson fire jade, rare rank, high quality. This ore contains the essence of crimson flame, which has the specialized ability to melt refined ore into liquid. Sehong understood what it was, and Inchul said that if he absorbed the essence of the crimson fire jade, he could permanently strengthen his crimson flame. He had prepared this because he had heard that he was skilled in its use. Sehong thanked him and said that it would definitely help him greatly. Inchul also wanted to know if he was considering enrolling in the additional course he was teaching. Sehong asked, "He's talking about the basics of weaponry?" Inchul asked, He knows about that? Sehong replied that he knew. This course was supported by one of the largest budgets in Babylon. Sehong didn't know what to do. Before the regression, he'd never even heard of Inchul, so this professor's final grade probably wasn't very good. But now he was attracting a lot of attention. Sehong decided to enroll in the course, and Inchul asked again, can he handle it? He knew he'd already signed up for several additional courses. Sehong replied that this would only be the fourth, and Inchul shook his hand and said he looked forward to working with him then. Sehong replied that he did too, and the system reported that Inchul's connection and purpose had been extracted, and his kinship level with Sehong's creator was 1. Inchul's destiny is fire-bearing iron, high rank, medium, low quality. It's a metal with flames that has the properties of wood and can accumulate fire within. If someone can extract metal from a person, then that means they can also forge and craft the human body. When multiple attributes coexist in the body, conflict arises. Since this is fatal for a blacksmith who requires precision, it's customary to use only the attribute that best matches the affinity. It's completely different, and the internal mana needed to block heat is depleted to the required level. A body deprived of mana absorbs the essence of Crimson Flame. As a blacksmith, he must create a magic circuit within his body exclusively for Crimson Flame. He tensed, realizing that only then could he forge it within himself. A moment later, a bright, fiery explosion erupted within his body, and the system reported that his attribute mana had been strengthened. He had gained a spiritual magic rank skill. The body is the most primal material a blacksmith can craft. As internal magic circuits are forged, physical abilities grow and strength increases. All stats have increased significantly due to the skill's effect. Sehong had D-rank strength, mana, stamina, and agility. Sehong clenched his fist and realized it was spiritual magic. He recalled the girl sitting over him, telling him he had the materials, yet he was giving up without even considering how to use them. He wasn't an idiot. Was he really just going to accept it? He smiled and replied that everything was correct and he should use everything he could. It didn't matter whether he was a future ally or an enemy. This time, he would have nothing to regret. Sometime later, he found himself at the university, and Assistant Han announced that today, they would finish work on the items he had been working on during his last classes. Since the finished products were planned for delivery both within the academy and abroad, it could be said that their first semester depended on what they did today, so they should try their best to avoid regrets later. Understood? The guys rushed to work and shouted, yes. Sehong forged a weapon and accepted that it was no good. His body couldn't keep up, so many of the parts came out crooked. Now was not the time for him to relax, and he continued working. A moment later, when he succeeded in creating the weapon, he examined it and realized that it seemed pretty good. The rest would be difficult given the time, and if he had done everything at an average level, he could have received a larger budget, but he thought it would be better to do at least one thing properly. He placed the sword on the table and prepared it completely, when suddenly he exclaimed and felt the sound of a sea of destruction. Every time he heard that sound, he made good things. This wasn't temporary sharpness, but blades etched into the blade's very body. White light. The longsword armament is complete. A great blacksmith reveals his intentions through mere fundamentals. The technique of a blacksmith who fully unleashed the potential of a material to create a new blade can, without exaggeration, be called first-rate. He obtained the white light style skill, a long merch forged from this pure white blade. The finely polished blade harmonizes with the flow of mana, possessing a strong yet sharp edge. A masterpiece of a blacksmith with outstanding skills, its cutting ability increases as mana is filled. Considering he used ordinary iron, it turned out merely passable. His pre-regression skills are returning, albeit very slowly. The guys around him hated this feeling. Maybe they should drop out? They were disappointed with their results. The next day, Saturday morning, the guys gathered at the university, and Sehong asked if she wanted to see his enchantment. This was unexpected. He was also interested in her basic skills. Lei replied that he shouldn't worry, since her workshop was in a more secluded place. He asked again, isn't it too far? Leah wondered if he really thought he could see her enchantment so easily. Sometime later, they arrived at the Akarkuf hardware store, and Leah announced that they were there. When she entered, she shouted, Grandma, she's here. Her old lady was cleaning her ear with her finger and said she wasn't deaf. Who is this, her boyfriend? Lee replied, absolutely not. He's the best student from the Borset faculty admitted this year. Old lady chuckled, noting that Babylon must be on the verge of collapse since they'd accepted such a frail guy. Her name was Helena, and she introduced herself. Sehong also said hello and said he was a first-year student in the forging department. Helena said, enough chatter. They should get to work quickly. And the first years had a ton of work to do this week. They pointed to the workshop over there, and Sehong realized that the old woman, or rather her skills, seemed better than he thought. He couldn't understand why she kept a hardware store in such a place. Lee took up arms and said that the work had indeed piled up. This was an enchantment palette, and these were powders made from ground magic stones. Sehong knew the standard was 8 colors, but she used them quite diversely. Was her job to restore damaged enchantment formulas with this? Leah replied that it was true. She could earn money and indulge in frustration as much as she liked, without worrying about the cost of materials. When she brushed her brush over her subject, Sehong realized he'd come because he thought she was desperate. He remembered the words of a student they knew who called her a loser, who who failed every exam and couldn't even hold on to her position as the best student in the department. But seeing her in person, he realized the cause of her condition could be easily corrected. The ability to immerse himself in a task like this was also a talent. He looked around and realized it resonated with the flow of mana to a special effect. His hands were itching to do something anyway, since he'd engraved white light for the first time in a long time. Helena approached him and told him to try using it. If he could do it, he could take whatever he wanted, and he could pile it up. He thought about how it felt like she was helping them. Sehong replied that if there was a way to use a special whetstone of such quality, he should definitely try it. After that, he concentrated, took the dagger in his hand, and Helena asked if he was going to use it. He confidently answered yes. Judging by the even wear of the blade and the unbent shaft, this knife belonged to someone who knew how to wield a sword. As for this whetstone, it was the most evenly compressed mana particles. With this, he'll be able to properly sharpen the blade, even if he pushes it to the limit. He began sharpening the knife, and Helena wondered if this guy was really a first year. At that moment, Leah exclaimed that everything was ready, then asked her grandmother when she got here. She replied that she didn't know and called her firmware, after which Leah came closer and asked if she was trying to find her little brother's flaw, but nothing worked. Was she right? Helena got angry and yelled at her to shut up, then hit her on the head with her hand. Her glasses instantly flew off, and Leah pulled back, exclaiming in pain. Helena asked if he was finished. Sehong replied that this was the limit for now, but next time it would be better. After that, Helena said everything was clear and then they should both get out of here. Leah dragged him out the door, pushing him behind her back, and smirked, saying that she was just grumbling for no reason, so they should go. Helena looked at the knife and thought about it, when suddenly an acquaintance of hers walked in and exclaimed, "Sister, what's she doing?" Helena told him to be quiet, and he clutched his head and asked, "There are already so many orders. What's going on with the kitchen knife?" she asked. "When will he quit this restaurant? The guy who should be a professor of combat is messing around." He asked her not to pick on someone else's hobby, then picked up the knife and looked at it questioningly. He turned to Helena and asked, "Did she get drunk again and sharpen this?" Helena replied that it wasn't her, and the guy asked, "Then is this the work of those assistants she'd recently become close with? Their skills must have improved greatly." Helena replied that it was a freshman, and the guy asked again, "What?" She replied that it was a freshman who had entered this year. He was very surprised. Who is he really? When they reached the university, Sehong asked if the old lady from the hardware store was the professor of the forging department. She replied yes. She'd heard that she retired 5 years ago and opened a hardware store in Akarkuf. Sehong asked if there was a backstory to this. She replied that she wasn't sure there was anything special. Quite a few professors had left the forging department in recent years. Sehong asked again, "Is that so?" He considered that, given that in the future, it would become weaker than the Babylon department. He couldn't simply turn a blind eye. Lie asked again, what was more important? How was he feeling about her enchantment? He replied that the basics were flawless, which is quite good. Nothing special happened, but she thinks too narrowly. She asked again, "What?" The protagonist replied that she had come up with better methods but hadn't used them. Lee asked again, how did he know about that? He replied that if she doesn't know something, she can learn it, but if she knows and still can't do it, that's a problem. A creator's imagination is a weapon and a talent in itself, and she's suppressing it. She asked again, does he think she does this because she doesn't know how? Sehong pulled a dagger from his pocket and said he had plans, so he couldn't show her for long and that she needed to watch carefully. If she was told to place a stone beneath the surface of the water, creating the stone and immersing it was forging. Applying a sample of the immersed stone to the surface of the water was enchanting. That's why enchanting has the nature of dreaming. Crimson flame, the white style, not externally. She must hide the enhancement inside, beneath the surface of the weapon. If one isn't enough, she must separate the layers. Let her do it now. He struck the wood with the knife, and magical powers appeared around it. The crimson flame would become like a blooming lotus, floating on a stream. He couldn't call it a full-fledged enchantment, but if Leah did it, then geniuses like her were prone to forge their own path even in doubt. She suddenly exclaimed, Junior, let him lend it to her. She would do everything right and return it, so please let him lend it to her. Leah started shaking his shoulders, and Sehong calmly said he didn't mind, but she should take those as well. He handed her a few more of these knives, and she thanked him and said that she loved him. Sehong looked after her in bewilderment, and the system reported that the connection with Leah's target had been extracted, the creator's level of the tool being 1. Sehong breathed a sigh of relief and said that youth was bursting from his body. When he entered the university, he began to wonder if today would finally be the day he would meet one of the 3 dogs. The confrontation between the mad dog from his childhood and the demon of destruction, which was more important to him. At that moment, Erica approached him from behind, and he asked what she was doing. She replied that she was following him, and he asked if he told her to move away, would she do it? Erica replied that she would move away, as she could simply watch from a distance. But she invited him inside, and magical beams of light formed between them, and the system announced Erica's fate. A 4-pointed stone. This is an artificial ore containing compressed, attuned mana, and when mixed with other minerals, it regulates the disorganized structure of internal mana. Asteraceae burst is a multicolored ore combining multiple shades that possesses excellent amplifier properties, unlocking the potential of mixed materials to the limit. Sometime later, when the guys entered the arena, they were greeted by the host, who said, "Welcome to the first years of Babylon." The famous landmark of their martial arts hall welcomes them to the ranking matches. She is the youngest professor in the combat department, in charge of hosting the show today. Her name is Ranfan. She decided to introduce today's students, and here's the first one. She's the top fourth-year graduate of Akar Kuf, and the next head of the Myers family, which consistently produces C-class heroes. She's a flawless superhuman who's been breaking records as the #1 martial arts hall leader for 3 years now. The current A-class hero and their champion, and also the Holy Sword, who finally ascended to the top of the Tower of Heroes, Arya Myers. She is the first player today to challenge the champion. An intangible cultural asset of South Korea, the heir to Spear, Smoldering Flame Wheel, a top third-year student in the Spear Arts department, and a promising member of the top 10 martial arts hall. Sehong smiled and realized they had finally met. This was Mad Dog, Songha. A moment later, Songha demonstrated his weapon skills alongside Arya. They began to wrestle, and suddenly he gritted his teeth in anger, and Arya smiled. She directed all her magical power at him, and he tried to escape. Sehong, watching from the sidelines, wondered if even considering his age was below standard, he hadn't even received the support befitting an heir, like the Smoldering Flame Wheel. Many things troubled him, but the biggest problem was his weaponry. Songha lunged at her, and Arya easily pointed her sword at his neck. He lowered his gaze and said in a trembling voice that he had lost. Arya smiled and said it was a good job. The host announced the match was over, and Arya was the winner. Ranfan then said they would have now moved on to the interview with the 2 participants. That was the plan, but Cadet Songha was forced to go ahead due to circumstances. Arya chuckled at the idea of fighting a 9th ranker right after. It would be difficult even for her. Maybe they could fill the empty time with a Q&A with her? Sehong watched Songha leave and realized he was upset. He stood up, and Erica asked if he was leaving without watching the whole thing. He replied, yes. He didn't really like it. She irritated him. Erica watched him go, thinking, what a relief it was that he didn't come for her, but why was he so angry? At that moment, someone turned to her and asked, interesting freshman. It was Arya who noticed him and said with a grin that she might have found just the right one. Songha was sitting in the park near the martial arts hall. MC saw him and thought, Yom Songha is alive and well. Although he had a bit of a dog-like character, he was the mainstay of the sacrificial squad and the one who ultimately sacrificed his life to defeat the demon god of the Sea of Destruction. Since everything had been going smoothly so far, maybe he could get the Destiny Stone without any problems this time. Songha interrupted his thoughts and asked if he was watching the fight. Sehun replied, yes, something like that. Songha said he was very good at finding it. He turned around and said, why is the best student of the Borsipa faculty here? MC wondered why he was acting like this. He replied he hoped they could talk a little. Songha ordered him to leave. Sehun said it would be good for him too. Simple. Songha interrupted him and said he didn't seem to know, so he'll only say it once. He hates weaklings, those who can't do anything on their own, and especially those who consider themselves his equal, using tricks. So, whatever he wants to talk about, let him get lost, Blacksmith. MC thought. Compared to the times of the Mad Dog, he was polite. Judging by this attitude, words wouldn't solve the problem. Songha turned around and said that it looked like he wasn't going to back down. MC said he would only tell him one thing. The history of the Spear, Smoldering Flame Wheel, will end because of him. Songha lowered his head, then quickly approached MC and clenched his fist. The system window reported that the fate imprint, Gluttonous Iron, was activated. Songha wondered if he had deflected a blow saturated with his mana. He guessed that's why he was the best student in the faculty. Perhaps he did have the right to speak to him after all, but the trace of the magical power of the smoldering flame still hadn't faded. That is the true power of the spear. He's finished. He rushed to attack, after which Sehun swung his hand and sent him flying back with a bright explosion. He exhaled, and Songha thought, what? A smoldering flame that should only respond to his mana in his hand? No way. He took it apart and stole it? He tried to attack MC, who nodded his head to the side, with a smirk on his face. He thought, this idiot is about to lose it. The massacre at the Flameflower Gate probably happened for this very reason. Songha clenched his fist and punched Sehun. He thought, the effect of the voracious iron is almost over, and his body is also at the limit. Songha looked ahead in surprise, where Jake appeared, who held his blow. Songha asked, Jake Myers? Does he know the best student of the Borsipa faculty? Jake answered, yes, I think so. Songha started to leave and ordered them to get lost. Jake put his hand to his head and replied, yes, sir. He understands. He told Sehun to go. The MC ordered him to remember his words, and Jake interrupted him in fear and asked him not to say anything weird. He just needs to leave quickly. Songha thought he couldn't hold back and struck. He almost tarnished the reputation of the spear of the smoldering flame wheel and caused trouble for the master. Jake asked Lee Se-hoon what was he even thinking, starting a fight with the Sunbae. If he hadn't intervened, he could have really died. The MC smirked and asked him, no way. Jake asked again, what? Se-hoon replied, he was just threatening him. The system window reported, connection with the target Yum Songa has been established. He thought, next, connection extraction. However, he is exclusively familiar with the mad dog Yum Songa. If he is so soft now, the effect of the Destiny Stone may also change. He will have to think about how to increase the connection level with Yum Songha. In any case, this guy also looks very useful. Se-hoon looked at Jake and asked if he hurt his hand. Jake smiled and replied, everything is fine. He has a strong hand. MC thought, a strong hand, huh? Jake said that more importantly, what did he say about his sister in the arena? Se-hoon asked if by sister he meant Arya Myers? Jake answered, yes. MC replied, nothing special, just that she's arrogant. Jake grabbed his head and screamed, what? No wonder she asked everything about him. She was interested in him. MC asked if she heard his words among all that noise. She has acute hearing. Jake grabbed his head and asked him to speak more quietly. Se-hoon winked at him and said, well, if it's just interest, he's even glad. He thought Yum Songha's main interest is probably defeating Arya. If he attracts the attention of his rival, his importance will naturally increase. Jake said, you can't take this so lightly. He doesn't know but his sister. MC interrupted him and asked, petty and treacherous? Jake started looking around fearfully and said, this is too much. Why does he dislike his sister so much? The Saint of the Sword, Arya Myers. Some time ago, she threw away the sword and said, this sword was nothing special. One day, the Saint of the Sword suddenly disappeared and then appeared with a sword made from the remains of a demon god, a demon of destruction. MC answered, her face written, problems. He waved his hand and said, he's leaving. Jake asked, what happened? At that moment, a message from Arya came on his phone. She wrote, it seems he made an interesting friend. Now let him tell her everything about him. Jake thought she seemed to be saying that from now on, he should be a bridge between them. A few more notifications came on his phone, which made him flinch. Arya wrote, his petty and treacherous sister is asking for a favor, right? Jake froze with the phone in his hands and said, nightmare. The next morning, MC sat in the lecture hall of Babylon Academy, wondering if he had pushed Yum Songha too hard yesterday. Han sat in front of him, assessing the situation. He said an exchange meeting. He heard the schedule would be finalized soon. A man drove into the hall and said he was Reese Doa. He would be teaching their specialized classes for the next 2 weeks. The subject would be forging attributes. Someone thought it was that professor with the reputation of being crazy. Reese said he wanted to share something before the class started. The applications were evaluated last week. This is the budget for the first semester. Let them apply one by one. David, he cried out loudly, yes. After a while, Reese said, and finally Lee Se-hoon. MC stood up, and Hans turned around and wondered how much he would get. The student thought, he feels like he'll be given 3 times as much as him. Reese said his budget hasn't been allocated yet. MC heard many people calling his hairstyle ugly, so he let his bangs grow. He apologized, and Reese replied that since the level of completion of his work was incredibly high, it was decided to put it up for public auction for the second-year students this Wednesday. They decided to set his budget based on the winning bid, so he needed to wait a bit. Se-hoon wondered if this was Weisstein Malk's doing. He had even gone so far as to say that his application would be reviewed separately. Well, if there was a problem, Professor Kim and Chol would have stopped it. He replied he understood. Reese said that today, they would sort out the residual mana, and one cadet volunteered to help with the lesson. He called for entry, and Songha entered the room. Reese said that this was his temporary assistant, Yum Songha, a third-year student in the Spear Arts Department at a Kharkuf. Someone shouted, why him? Reese said that he wished they showed such interest in their studies. Enough introductions. We need to make sure they've grasped the basic concepts before moving on to practice. When creating weapons, residual mana is primarily divided into 2 types, the basic chargeable type and the self-contained type, which generates its own mana or absorbs it from the environment. Both have their pros and cons, but the difficulty of the self-contained type is much higher. The reason is that the method for creating a mana core isn't standardized and varies depending on the materials, techniques, and the creator's mana. Therefore, they will all start with the chargeable type. Assistant. Songha released mana and created several rings, and Reese said that fire attribute mana is extremely unstable, making it difficult to use as residual mana. However, if its nature is suppressed, it exhibits excellent retention qualities. An example is the technique his assistant is currently demonstrating, Smoldering Flame Wheel. Hans said that mana of the fire attribute is difficult to control at such a level. The guy said that even a furnace is difficult for him to control. Reese said that since they have such a good assistant, they should take advantage of this opportunity. Let them hand in their assignments by next Thursday. They can create whatever they want, but stick to this theme. Now they're off to the forge. Let them get moving. And yes, let them not forget to change their clothes. Everyone thought, this is a chance, a golden opportunity to talk to senior Yum Sungha. Hans approached Sungha and extended his hand to greet the senior. He is Hans. Sungha discontentedly ordered him to get lost. Hans replied, yes. He drooped and thought, he is trash. MC closed his eyes, sighed and left the room. Sungha said, Lee Se-hoon, what does he know about him? Se-hoon replied, he heard that mastery of the smoldering flame wheel spear is determined by the number of flame wheels. He thought, Lee Won-ryong, the current head of the Flame Flower sect and an A-rank hero, he has achieved 8 wheels. The MC spoke up, saying that since he'd created the 3 he had now effortlessly, he could maintain 6 wheels simultaneously if he did it properly. Songha followed him and asked him to wait. So what? The MC asked. Had he reached the 7th wheel? Songha's eyes widened in surprise, and Se-hoon said, and then, one day, he couldn't maintain it anymore. Songha wondered how he knew this if he hadn't even told the sect leader. Se-hoon said, did he see? He had a slight talent for handling fire, but he saw the flames he wielded, and it seemed strange to him. He couldn't properly release his remaining power. One could say he was simply letting it evaporate haphazardly. Songha asked, does he know the reason? The MC replied, he can guess, although he didn't see the need to tell him. Se-hoon asked, what? He clenched his fist and told him to state his conditions. Se-hong said first, he would pay a fair price for all his advice and assistance. Second, he would consult with him if any problems arose. Let him tell him his decision before they reached the forge. Se-hong frowned and said, he agreed, as long as he provided proof. At noon, whispers echoed in the forge workshop. Someone looked at MC and asked, he forges even without a blueprint? Is he saying there's no need for verification? Fire attribute ore and darkness attribute ore in a ratio of 7:3. The guys stood behind Se-hong, chatting. If you just thoughtlessly throw them away, all the attribute mana will dissipate. Why is the best student in the department doing this? The heating continues until the attribute mana begins to leak out. Simultaneous control of flame and mana to retain it inside. Thermal substitution. Ruse frowned and thought, he'll immediately use thermal substitution. So that's why Professor Kim and Chul approved the public auction. MC thought, in some eyes it might look like a normal thermal substitution, but Yum Sungha surely saw something different. Let him watch closely. Sona stood behind him and watched. Fire attribute mana, rushing outward, is placed inside, while dark attribute mana, gnawing inward, is placed outside. This maintains a balance between the two opposing types of mana, allowing a perfect circle to be drawn. Sona thought, could this really be it? His second attribute mana, which was forbidden because it was considered a hindrance to the smoldering flame wheel spear. If he were to use it like this, Sona grabbed his head and said he had sagged down to the 5th wheel. MC asked, what? Sona created rings and said, he managed to complete the black flame wheel, but he wasn't strong enough for 6. Soon said, and yet, 5 black flame wheels are stronger than 7 regular fire wheels. Soma said the Fire Flower Gate periodically sends instructors to test the skills of successors who have entered the world, and if someone falls below the 6th wheel, their successor status is revoked. Sehun said, then maybe he should just do it like before, just once. MC replied, that won't work. His dark attribute mana is no longer controllable. MC asked when this instructor would arrive. Soma replied, tomorrow. Sehun looked away and thought, he said that being revoked of successor status leads to expulsion, a method that can be used in just one day. He placed his hand on Songa's shoulder and asked, if his successor status is protected, will he be able to do anything? Songa replied, he can. MC said, that's great. The system window reported, Yum Songa's fate, a high-ranking crimson stone wheel. It is an ore in which fire attribute mana and dark attribute mana coexist. The waves created by the two attributes cause a resonance in the internal mana. MC said to start, they will replace his weapon. After a while, Songa said, this is Akarkuf's personal training hall. Only the top 100 martial arts halls or the top 30 of the faculty can use it. MC said, show off. He opened the system and asked, can't you change the environment here? You will tweak it a little. A gate appeared in front of them, and MC asked, the gate of the flame flower? Is he homesick? Songa answered, the master sent it, so he uses it sometimes. MC asked, will they then start creating training tools? He created a small sphere and tapped it with his finger. It is a dark red stone wheel. After a while he said ready. Songa looked at it and asked, is it uncomfortable for him with just one spear and here are 2 at once? Sehun said it will be easier to control 2 mana attributes. From now on, let him create a fire wheel with his left hand and release the mana of the darkness attribute with his right. Songa asked, just release? Sehun answered, yes. He exhaled, then released his mana and assumed a stance. He looked at the spear's glow in surprise and asked, what was that? Sehun replied, it means he unconsciously allowed the dark attribute mana to flow into his left hand. It's a natural phenomenon for several mana attributes to mix when released, but in his case, this chaos only hinders both of them. It's probably because he's only been suppressing the dark mana all this time, so if he gets used to controlling both attributes simultaneously, reaching the 6th wheel won't be difficult. Let him wear this during training. Songa said, there's something good about it. 3 hours of training had passed. Songa quickly swung the spear, and MC watched and thought, he adapts quickly. Is it because the training method was designed by his future self? He'll see how big he was from the past. Breathing rhythm, muscle movement, shifting the center of gravity, waves of mana circulating in his body and erupting from the tip of the spear. Songa stopped and asked what he was staring at. Sehun asked, what did he think? Collecting data. to create a weapon for him. This time, he's doing it for credit, so there's no need to count on much. Songa turned around and said, "Who would put their hopes on a weapon made by a first year?" MC looked up and said, "By the way, is there any reason he has to maintain his status as successor?" Songa stopped and said, "His master wants him to become the gate master, so as a disciple, he simply follows his will." The one who took the orphan Songa in as an adopted son and cared for him was the S-rank hero and first gate master of the Flame Flower, Yeom Jin-hyun. Although he lost his former strength after retiring due to an injury, as a master and a father, he still has an absolute influence on this guy. The system window reported affinity level 3. Songa turned around and asked why he was helping him. MC thought about it. The 6 great demonic realms, places swallowed by the Pandemonium Swamp, now teeming with demonic beasts. Sehun replied that he intended to enter all of these demonic realms. To do this, he needed people to protect him and materials to craft weapons to arm these people. If he was the future head of the Flame Flower Gate, his skills and financial situation should be up to par, right? Songa responded. How mercantile? MC replied, of course. They hadn't known each other for long, so why would he do charity? Songa asked. Did he mean he would have to pay for his help? Let him help him become the head of the Flame Flower Gate. Then he would follow him into the 6 great demonic realms. MC remembered how he had asked him to make weapons for him some time ago, and he would kill the demon gods for him. Sehong grinned and asked, will he regret it? Now, even if he doesn't want to, he'll make him the leader. The system window reported that the Dark Scarlet Stone Wheel Fate imprint had been activated. On the first floor of Flavium, in the common training hall, the instructor of the 7th Flame Wheel of the Flame Flower Gate, Kang Hyun-woon, bowed and said, "It's been a while, young master." Songa asked, "Who are they?" Hyun-woon replied, "They're students selected by the leader. He told him to broaden their horizons through sparring with him, young master. Since he's the most outstanding person after the next leader." Songa interrupted him and said, "Instructor Kang Hyun-woon, the next leader hasn't been chosen yet. Let him watch his language." Hyun-woon smiled and apologized. He thought he'd momentarily confused. "Will they begin the skills assessment then?" Songa replied, "No. He demands promotion to the 7th wheel." Hyun-woon looked at him in surprise and thought, "A fool who knew nothing but training dares to encroach on the leader's position?" He remembered the man's words. If Yeom Songa challenges the 7th wheel, let him deal with him. No matter what happens, he will settle everything. Hyun-woon said, starting from the 7th wheel. Sparring with the instructor is mandatory. He should think about Elder Yeom Jin-hyun of the main gate. It's too early for him. Songa said he talks too much. Is he afraid of losing his position as instructor? Hyun-woon ordered his spear to be brought immediately. This 7th wheel test will be a competition for the title of the best. The conditions are simple. The one with the stronger fire wheel wins. The promotion condition is victory or a draw, and now they begin. Songa held his spears out in front of him, and Hyun-woon smirked and asked, "Twin short spears? How rude." Songa quickly swung it, surprising his opponent. Hyun-woon asked with displeasure, did he forget the head's words about suppressing the dark attribute mana? Such filthy flames won't be recognized by the flame wheel. Songa replied, "They'll see when they cross weapons." Hyun-woon screamed, "He'll regret this." He created wheels and launched them forward. Songa's mana transformed into a creature and Hyun-woon screamed, "What? What's going on? His flame wheel is being devoured." "No, is it being torn apart?" His weapon began to crack loudly, then broke into several pieces. He fell to his knees, and Songa asked, "Rough, he says?" After a while, the MC asked, "What happens now? What a waste of good materials." Songa replied that once the promotion ceremony was over, he would be recognized as an instructor of the Flame Flower Gate and the official successor. Sehun asked how to become the head. Songa replied that there were 2 conditions. The first was to reach the 8th wheel, and the second was to gain the consent of a majority of the instructors. The MC crouched down by the weapon shards and asked if even if he reached the 8th wheel, would he be able to gain their consent. Songa replied that he could achieve this through duels, so there would be no problem. However, this would no longer be a sparring match for the title of best, so it wouldn't be as easy as today. Sehun said then it wouldn't take long. Songa spoke as if it were easy. The MC replied that he was saying this because it truly seemed possible. Let him remember today. Let him worry about how he would pay for it from now on. Songa asked him to tell him what he needed as payment, money or materials. He would provide everything in his power. Besides, there's one more thing he wants to order. MC asked, "Already?" Songa thought they were pretty good, but he only borrowed an assignment that needed to be submitted for class. If he could create them in just a few hours, he wondered what kind of spear he'd make next. Songa nudged MC and told him to make him a more convenient weapon. Sehun ordered him to let go of the spear. He had just almost pierced him. He asked, "What did he say?" The system window reported, the affinity level with the target, Yeom Songa, has increased to level 2. As the affinity level increases, the relationship will strengthen. The relationship with the target Yeom Songa, a transaction. A destiny stone is created every time a transaction with the target is completed. The maturation speed of destiny stones increases when a transaction with the target is made. There are currently no destiny stones created. People have gathered in the auction house. The host thanked everyone for waiting. They are starting the regular auction of the 2nd year of the forging department. MC looked around and thought, he doesn't remember there usually being so many participants. Erica looked at MC and said, "He's changed his style a lot." MC replied, "Professor and Chul told him that appearance is important." He thought, It seems like the title of the best student in the department really means something. It will be difficult to openly examine him when he's the center of attention. He's interested in Michael's plan to take over the forging department. The host said, the topic is iron swords. A total of 36 items were presented, and a special quality control process was added. This fabric is called sogyumpo. It's woven from molten silver obtained from an S-rank white tiger. It's soft but hard like metal and has resistance to slashing attacks. Thanks to this, he swung the sword and broke it. He said, as you can see, they can easily identify items that sacrifice durability to increase cutting power. During this auction, they will use sogyumpo to weed out such defective goods. So, the first sword to be presented is student Joseph's blue horn sword. Someone said, it looks interesting. It seems they've prepared properly. Erica asked if he knew why they were doing this. The MC replied that many only knew that the white tiger's body was extremely durable, but its ability was a bit more complex. Fur, skin, flesh, and bones all had different properties. Among them, fur imitates the sharpness of the metal weapon that touches it. Therefore, no matter how good the weapon, it eats away at the weapon's durability. Erica asked, then isn't the white light longsword at a disadvantage? After all, swords with increased cutting power usually have low durability? Sehun replied, exactly. This is clearly a setup aimed at him and Professor Kim and Chul. But if the sword breaks here, the supervising professor's reputation will also suffer. This is only true if he did it poorly. The host hit the hammer and said, sword number 25 sold for 4 million won. Now finally, sword number 36. Borsipa's best first-year student, student Lee Se-hoon, the quality inspection of the white light longsword begins. He swung the sword and dropped it on the floor. He asked, just now, what just happened? MC stood up and asked, will they let him explain briefly? Were they thinking? Lee Se-hoon? He said, usually, a sword focused on sharpness would easily break on Seogumpo, but the long sword of white light gathers mana scattered in the air and condenses it on the blade like a fine edge. Someone asked, mana? They couldn't sense anything like that no matter how hard he tried. MC replied, it's normal that they barely feel mana. The density of it isn't high enough to call it sword chi, but since it's too sharp for a light source, it's referred to as sharpness aura. Erica asked, so that phenomenon was also because of the aura? Sehun replied, yes, that's exactly it. When identical auras collide, they cause resonance rather than mutual annihilation. In using this, he can do something interesting. The system window reported that this was a high-grade 4-pointed stone. It was an artificial ore containing compressed, attuned mana. When mixed with other minerals, it regulated the disorganized structure of internal mana. He clenched the mineral in his hand and swung his sword. The system window reported that Eric's fate imprint, the 4-pointed stone, had been activated. He thought the chaotically fluctuating mana was being organized. All he needed to add was a clearly defined path. He swung his sword, and the system window reported that the rank of the weapon, White Light Longsword, had been upgraded to Epic. An Epic-ranked White Light Longsword. It was a longsword adorned with an aura engraving. The embedded mana was compressed and released at the blade's edge, which had been sharpened to the limit. Se-hong thought, as he had expected, the blade couldn't be sharpened with an ordinary whetstone. He said, a simple skill that strengthens the aura of sharpness has been added, and the rank has risen from rare to epic. Please let them reflect this in the starting price. The host said fearfully, then according to the instructions, they will change the starting price from 1 million won to 5 million won. The equipment created by the best student of the faculty is now capturing everyone's attention. Moreover, an improved item whose rank has risen from rare to epic. This is new material for research. People started raising their hands and shouting out their bids. 10 million, 30 million, 100 million. Jake stood up and shouted, 200 million. Erica said, 210 million. The host asked, 210 million. Did anyone bid more? Are they really ready to leave empty-handed? Jake shouted, 300 million. Erica said, 310 million. The MC thought in surprise, so this is what high society is like, throwing money around. A girl entered the room and said, 600 million. Jake turned around and thought, 600 million. No matter how you look at it, that's it. He remembered Arya's words about buying Lee Si-hoon's weapon at any cost. Yunha asked if she hadn't bet enough. A whale had shown up for the shrimp fight. Erica and Jake thought it was a curse. The host said the white light longsword had sold for 600 million won. The MC looked at the girl in surprise. After a while, she asked, had they checked it yet? The MC replied, yes, everything had been credited. How does she plan to use the white light longsword? Yunha replied, if she had time, she planned to go to the danger zone and test it. It would be a shame to use such an item just for training. The MC said he'd like to try it out. If she hadn't chosen a location yet, how about Mount Yunwal? Yunha replied, that's the place chosen for the first-year students' first practice. The MC replied, yes. He thought it would be useful to visit it beforehand. Yunha answered thoughtfully, and yet given his position it wasn't much. MC said he would make her any weapon she wanted as a gift in return. Yunha picked up a calendar and suggested making a schedule. How about next week? MC smiled and suggested that. He figured it was just an excuse. The conqueror of peaks, Jürgen Kruger. He's the chairman of the board of the UD Group, a leading global corporation and the world's most powerful necromancer. One of the artifacts he lost after the Pandemonium demon attack is hidden on Mount Yunwal. After a while, Jake stood in the room. Arya said thoughtfully, so he was saying that he couldn't get it in the end. Jake apologized, and Arya replied that what's done is done. She suggested they think about what to do next. Didn't he say they were taking the same classes? Jake replied, yes, it's Professor Ma Kwang-soo's body control course. Then let him find the right time and ask him. If he's decided on this matter, she'll talk to her father again about the succession ceremony. At this rate, he'll soon be displaced as the top graduate. He expects it himself, right? He said it's forbidden until graduation, but even so, it's too much. Jake replied, I understand. No matter what method he has to use, he'll definitely get the sword from Lee Se-hoon. Arya smiled and asked if it's polite to interrupt Nuna when she's speaking. Jake apologized. Arya ordered him to bring it at any cost. Lee Se-hoon. Strange, is he getting on her nerves? After a while, MC said he was finished. Reese looked at the high-grade Crimson Spear in surprise. It is capable of storing fire attribute mana. This increases the effectiveness of the flame wheel. The high-grade Black 10 Spear. It is capable of storing darkness attribute mana. This increases the stability of the flame wheel. Reese thought the craftsmanship alone is impressive. But what's truly surprising are the embedded auxiliary spells for the flame wheel. Just think, a control system that blocks attribute mana if it exceeds a safe threshold. Reese said at this level, it can be considered a teaching aid and a textbook at the same time. This is the perfect result. From now on, he can consider himself exempt from his studies. MC thanked him. The students began to whisper. If they wanted their opinions, he should have graduated right now. Why are they in the same class with a guy like that? What bad luck. MC bowed and said, then he'll be going. Reese said, okay, here, let him take his spears. Let him know if he wants to sell them. After a while, he went outside and said, today is a class with that old man Ma Kwang-soo. He entered the room, and Jake asked in surprise, what, does he have a class too? MC replied, he just came early to practice. If he needs to use the hall, he will leave. Jake loudly asked him to wait. He would like to ask him for one favor. Is that okay? Se-hoon replied, no. Jake said sadly, he didn't even listen. Se-hoon said, he bet his sister recommended getting weapons from him. He has no intention of doing that, so they should just give up. Just like with Ryu and Ha, he can't let Arya lose interest in him. With his current skills, she will definitely be disappointed in anything he creates. Jake reached into his bag and asked, how about this? He pulled out a heroic rank black flame hammer. It's a hammer crafted by refining dragonite. Each side is coated in mana with the properties of fire and darkness, multiplying the power of both. Se-hoon examined it and said, this item can be greatly improved. Overall, it's not bad. Jake suggested they have another duel. He'd wager this hammer. If he lost, he'd make a weapon for his sister. MC suggested adding another condition. If he won, he wouldn't mention his sister for a month, and he shouldn't forget to tell her about it. Jake replied, okay. He thought he hadn't expected his counterattack last time, so today he'd go all out from the start. He'd gathered so much mana just by clenching his fist. Apparently, that's why he was confident he could stop Yum Songa. The system window reported, Eric Inou's Fate imprint, 4-pointed stone deactivated. Ryunha's Bond imprint, the Voracious Iron, activated. Thanks to the effect of the 4-pointed stone, the body's mana harmonized. Se-hoon clenched his spears, and Jake thought, a short spear? It seemed familiar to him. Does being a blacksmith really mean being able to handle a wide variety of weapons? But if he thinks he can defeat him with a weapon that was merely familiar, then he's not that weak. This time, Jake rushed to attack and shouted, victory is his! MC quickly pushed him back, which surprised Jake. He asked, a smoldering flame wheel spear? Before returning to the past, Lee Se-hoon had heard many stories from Yom Songa. At first, it was only to increase the bond level. But when Yom Songa truly opened his heart to him, he shared techniques that had never been passed on to anyone else. And even though he was insulted and criticized back then, now he's capable of at least a rough immigration. MC swung his spear, and Jake thought, since he's lost his momentum, he's simply being chased around the arena. However, right now, Lee Se-hoon's physical capabilities are only determined by skill. If he waits for its effect to wear off, he can turn the situation in his favor. Se-hoon looked questioningly at Jake and thought, this guy. He realized that dragging out the fight will work to his advantage. So, even in a critical situation, he remains the top student, huh? Good instincts. MC gripped the spear and said, explosive ring. He thought he never imagined that he would use Yum Sungha's mana stored in the ink spider bracelet like this. Jake screamed. He clearly heard that he was using fire attribute mana. Damn it. He tried to release his mana and used the Myers formless sword. A blue axis and a thread of light headed towards Se-hoon. MC wondered if he was using sword techniques with his bare hands. Not bad. He had planned to hold back. First spear form, smoldering flame wheel. He used crescent eclipse and thought, but he can't afford to lose either. Their mana clashed, and Jake's fist appeared in front of MC. Se-hoon held his sword to Jake's neck, who said he lost. The system window reported contact established with the target, Jake Myers. MC asked, isn't it a draw? Jake replied, if you really wanted to, you could say so. But considering he used a near-lethal skill, it's more like his loss. Damn it, if only he could use a sword. Se-hoon asked, can't he use it? Jake replied, he doesn't know why, but as soon as he picks it up, it breaks. He even once broke a sword with heroic rank durability. MC looked at him questioningly and thought, so that's what it was? He asked him to hold out his right hand. Jake asked, what? Okay. MC asked him to relax his hand and not move his mana. Otherwise, he'll get hurt. Jake wondered what he was up to. He saw MC swing his hammer and scream in fear. What? Stop. What is he doing? Sehun hit his palm and thought, I see. This changed the substance rather than strengthened it. Jake pulled his hand away and screamed. Whatever he did, let him explain first. Sehun asked. He wants him to make him a sword? Jake's eyes widened in surprise and the system windows reported extracting fate from target Jake Myers. Creator affinity level Lee Sehun. First. Destiny imprint high-ranking compression stone Jake Myers. It is an infinitely compressible ore. It compresses the absorbed mana. It will collapse if the density exceeds the strength of this. Sehun said, a sword he can't break. He turned around thoughtfully, and the system window reported that a connection had been established with the target, Ma Kwang-soo. He frowned and invited MC to chat. He told Jake to step outside for a minute. Kwang-soo said, last time he was an experienced blacksmith, then a skilled spearman. Who is he really? He better answer carefully so he doesn't mix anything up. MC said, what he means is, his stance is so perfect that it's suspicious. Kwang-soo looked thoughtfully at the mineral in Sehun's hands. He said, it's nothing special, just a trick using a skill. In other words, he adjusts his muscles to imitate someone else's body, just like that. When the effect wears off, everything disappears. Kwang-soo looked at him in surprise and asked, are there any limitations to this skill? MC replied. Observation takes time, and since he's forcing his body, the physical strain is simply enormous. Kwang-soo said, observation, imitation. He apologized for suspecting him. There was a demon with a similar ability, so he reacted strongly. Sehun thought, a doppelganger. He thought about that, didn't he? One of the 10 evils, pandemonium, a doppelganger. He enjoys copying his opponent's martial arts and then killing them with them. He's a cruel idiot, responsible for destroying the legacies of countless heroes. Ma Kwang-soo had a particular grudge against this creature. He thinks that's the reason for this connection. Either he suspected he was a doppelganger, or he thought it would be useful in his search. The main thing is, he found it useful. Sehun said that if it had something to do with demons, he could understand. He would have done the same thing himself. Kwang-soo asked again, really? The so-called heroes these days lack vigilance against demons. After observing his skills, he will have to completely revise his training methods. He will explain everything when the plan is ready. MC replied. He understood then. Kwang-soo thought, with his talent, he could easily become the best in Akarkuf if he wanted. Didn't he say that he was from a poor family? He would be interested in studying him. MC left the hall and answered the phone. Songa asked, has he already decided what he wants in return? MC replied, it's only been a day. What's the rush? Songa replied, he feels embarrassed that he hasn't repaid him yet. MC said, he already feels tired. He asked to listen. Does he by any chance know a mage from Babylon named Luisa Valente? Songa replied, he's never heard of her before. Does he know her? MC replied, it doesn't matter. Just let him secretly find out where she is and what she does. Does he even have the connections for this? Songa asked, was he underestimating him? MC asked not to blame him. After all, he was poor and powerless within the Flameflower Gate. Songa replied that he had other channels. Let him just trust him and wait. MC thought, this guy has trouble communicating too. I wonder what's going on with Louise now. Louise Valente, a wild dog. Unlike Yom Songa, she wasn't particularly famous in the past, but the problem is that Louise is a ticking time bomb. After all, they said she only became so crazy after her injury. So if he can find the right moment. A call came on his phone. Songa had found her. MC asked, already? Songa spoke. Louise Valente, the best second-year student in the Elements department. She seemed to be a promising cadet, but 6 months ago, during a sparring session in the martial arts gym, her wand exploded, her mana channels were irreparably damaged, and now she is on academic leave. She is undergoing rehabilitation at the main hospital, but it seems there is no improvement. He will send all the details in a document. Jake came out from around the corner and said, he's still here. He wanted to finish talking about his sword. MC interrupted him and said, Jake? He showed him the article and asked, does he know these two? Jake asked, Kruger and Barmouth, he thinks their families are related? And they are members of the Noblesse Club. MC said if he finds out about them for him, he will make him a sword. It will take him about a week. Jake asked in surprise, weeks? If he really does it, he is ready for anything. Sehun asked, really? Then first he needs to break his arm. Jake looked at him, puzzled, and MC said as naturally as possible. After a while, doctors were standing in the main hospital of Ascus. Louise extended her hand and said, 159th attempt, here we go. Wild dog, Louise Valente. She screamed, lava bullet. She clenched her jaw and cried out, clutching her face. Mana reverse flow phenomenon confirmed. Mana freezing initiated. No, injury. The doctor said to stop the experiment, administer mana neutralizers and tranquilizers immediately. The assistants cried out, yes sir. Louise said she was fine. She asked to just give her a little rest and they could continue the experiment. The doctor frowned and said, no, that's all for today. And for the time being, they will limit her rehabilitation experiments to 50 times a day. They will also lower the level of magic used to the basic level. Louise asked, what? Basic level? She asked to wait a minute, professor. She can do it. The doctors grabbed her and she asked, what, please? She needs just one more chance. The professor ordered to stop draining mana. Medical staff, let them quickly bring a tranquilizer. She screamed. She said she was fine. Louise broke free and screamed, she can. She said she can do it. At that moment, a syringe stuck into her neck and she lost consciousness. She thought, this is a nightmare. After a while, she opened her eyes and said, a nightmare. She was lying on the hospital bed and thinking she was in such a hurry. She threw a hysterical fit like a complete fool and just lost her chance. For now, instead of self-flagellation, she needs to find a way out. If rehabilitation experiments don't help, she needs to try something else. She needs to go exercise or meditate. She tried to leave the room when suddenly she collided with another patient. She grabbed her nose and screamed. A nightmare. Her nose. She thought, what kind of idiot doesn't even look where he's going? She saw the MC, who asked irritably where she was looking. An air raid siren sounded some time ago. All visitors in the building are asked to evacuate to the emergency exits. Again, the MC made his way forward and said, he really almost died. They'll see, he'll never deal with these idiots again. He saw Louise hovering, who thought, is this guy the mastermind of the crime? His rank is at least A class. Louise pushed him and asked, where is he looking? Currently, she asked. What? The MC asked. Where is she looking? Louise screamed irritably. He's an idiot. If he bumped into someone, he needs to apologize. She started to lose consciousness, and Sehun quickly caught her. He said, if she feels unwell, she needs to lie quietly. Why is she wandering around here? He will help her back to the room, so let her hold on and go. Louise replied, no need. MC asked, should he call a nurse then? Louise thought, damn it, if she gets caught, she won't be able to do anything, and will be stuck in her room. If her body was fine, a guy like him would have already. MC sat her down on the bed and asked if she needed anything. Louise replied, in the top drawer, there is a black case. Sehun replied, as soon as she gets better, he will leave, even if she doesn't ask. Just let her use it quickly. Louise replied, they only met today. Stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. She used the inhaler and exhaled. MC asked, he told her to get treatment, so why is she harming herself? She looked at him questioningly and asked, what kind of nonsense is he talking about? MC replied, that thing she just used. It was only making her throat worse. Louise asked, what did he say? Let him repeat it. What did he mean? Sehun replied that she heard it. At that moment, an announcement came over the loudspeaker. Cadet Lee Sehun, please have him report to the second-floor nurses station immediately. MC said, perhaps he should go. Louise asked, was he Sehun? MC replied, yes, it was him. Anyway, like he said, if she doesn't want to become a magical zero, she doesn't need to use it. She interrupted him and ordered him to disappear. She had no business talking to pathetic blacksmiths. Let him get out of here. He left the room, and she said discontentedly, a nightmare. These terrible, pathetic blacksmiths. The system window reported, connection with target Luis Valente established. MC thought, what? He was able to establish a connection? The doctor said there shouldn't be any serious problems. The fracture is clean, so the bone should heal within a week. There is no visible damage to the muscles or mana channels. Sehun asked, so, he will be discharged right after? The doctor said he would like him to rest for a week to be on the safe side. MC thought he could stay in Ascus for up to 2 weeks. During this time, he needs to close the distance with Louise and ease the damage to her mana channels. And first of all, he needs to deal with the mana devourer. He asked, doctor, does he by any chance know Louise Valente? The doctor thoughtfully adjusted his glasses and answered, she is a student he is treating. MC said, earlier in the hallway she grabbed her throat and had a seizure while trying to use magic. She asked him not to tell anyone, but he thought it could be dangerous. The doctor said, oh my god, he understands, he can go. MC thought, that's perfect. The next morning, Sehun got a call from Jake. He answered, and MC asked, Jake, what about the information he asked for earlier? Jake replied that he'd looked into the incident and that there was something suspicious about it. First of all, he knows about the Ivory Tower of Babylon, right? MC asked again, the Ivory Tower. Jake replied, yes, it's a philanthropic foundation. The Ivory Tower is supported by donations from magic professors, alumni, and related organizations, making it independent and separate from Babylon, and the influence of its magic students is enormous. Jake said the Ivory Tower selects scholarship recipients from each year, and at the time, Senior Goats was aiming for the second-year scholarship, and the person they called his main rival was... MC interrupted him and said, Luis Valente. Jake said, yes, exactly. Right before the scholarship sparring match, the weapon provided by the Barmouth Luis family exploded, and Senior Goats was ultimately chosen as the scholarship recipient. As for the unusual, the Barmouth and Kruger families are partners. Given the circumstances, it seems certain that Guts Kruger and Pierre Barmouth joined forces to frame Louis. So what about that inhaler? MC asked if there was anything else that bothered him. Jake replied, besides, Louise's injuries were quite serious. He heard Professor Charles from the Elemental Department did his best to help her. He still personally sponsors and helps Louise. Sehun thought it sounded like a touching story about a mentor helping his student, but something was wrong. MC said, thank you, that should be enough. Then, Jake asked to wait a minute. He has a request. Sehun asked, what's the matter? Jake said, there are a lot of people who are worried about him, including Yom Sung and Eric. If he has time, can he just tell them that he's okay? He's getting glares here. MC replied, he understood. Let him know if he finds out anything else later. He texted Songa not to approach Jake. If he crosses paths with him, let him just say hi. Songa replied, okay. MC thought, what okay? By the way, he doesn't have Eric's number. He can imagine Yom Songa causing trouble, but would Erica really do the same? He'll tell her later. He knocked on the door and someone on the other side asked, "Who is it?" Sehun replied, "He's the one who helped her yesterday." A hand came out of the room and pulled MC inside. Louise pinned him against the wall and yelled in displeasure, "He's an idiot." Sehun asked why she suddenly started swearing. Louise yelled, "Suddenly? He's saying suddenly? Does he have any idea what happened to her because of him?" A while ago, the doctor said that it seemed the intensity of the rehabilitation experiment was too high for her. She needs absolute rest for 2 weeks, and they will slowly resume after reducing the intensity of the experiment to level 1. Louise screamed, "Does he even know how hard she worked on rehabilitation for the past 6 months? Thanks to his useless interference, everything went to hell." Sehun said that inhaler was from yesterday. Louise screamed. She hadn't used it. Would he use it after saying that? Because of some crazy idiot. Sehun said her mana was burning out, he'd fix it for her. Louise chuckled and asked if he even knew what mana burnout was before he said anything. MC replied that it was an incurable disease that even the most accomplished mountaineers couldn't do anything about, at least for now. Louise looked at him carefully and suggested listening to what nonsense he was about to say. MC said they had a lot to discuss. First of all, that inhaler. Who did she get it from? Louise replied. A professor she knew gave this. MC replied that he didn't know the official name for it, but he called it a mana devourer. Louise asked again, a devourer? Sehun said yes. Explaining the details would take time, so he'd show her. The system window reported that the skill S-rank Divine Spiritual Magic was activating. He said to imagine that the circuit was originally designed for 110 volts, but now 220 volts were being supplied to the injured area of the neck. A conflict arose, which eventually led to an overload, making it completely impossible to use mana. Louise wondered, completely impossible to use mana? A while ago, the man had said it would be very effective for her wound. Louise thanked him, and Michael placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "Louise, if it's her, she can overcome mana burnout. So no matter what pain she encounters along the way, she should never give up." Louise said, "Yes, she will remember that." Currently, she clenched her fist and said, "He was just playing with her. She swears, she will make him pay."